Hey everyone. Welcome back for the fourth part of What If Naruto Went Back to the Time of Madara and Hashirama. As always, huge thanks to all of my Patreons. Making these videos would be impossible without you guys' support, especially with all the restrictions YouTube places on my type of content. As always, the full story is already out over there for you guys along with about 30 other different stories you can enjoy. Also feel free to send me any messages over there if you have any questions or even if you just want to chat. Link to all of that will be in the description. Anyways, everyone, enjoy the video. Chapter 23. The next morning found Sasuke looking more than a little angry as he scowled at his breakfast. A breakfast he couldn't see thanks to the bandage wrapped tightly around his eyes. Both he and Itachi had been placed on extended medical leave. Itachi was carefully maneuvering his way through his food while Sasuke continued to scowl at his own. Naruto had made a large pretense of showing shock when Minato had woken him up just an hour earlier. Minato was standing a few feet away, quietly talking to Fugaku who hadn't even had time to dress into his proper uniform. With a sigh Naruto picked up Sasuke's toast and shoved it towards the petulant Uchiha who only scowled further. "Just let me help you, team." Naruto grumbled distantly while Sasuke wondered at the name. Sasuke snatched the toast from his hand and took a forceful bite. "I don't need help eating breakfast. What I do need is the name of the person who dared to break into my house and why." Sasuke growled, looking far more like the Avenger Naruto was familiar with. "Did they leave any evidence?" Naruto asked innocently, eyebrows pulling together to further feign concern. He moved Sasuke's glass of milk closer to his hand when it appeared that Sasuke was more likely to knock it over than to actually manage to find it. "No. Other than the fact that they were using some high-end seals. I know you can buy seals from the Uzumaki, so it was either someone with a lot of money or it was someone really good at seals." Sasuke frowned, head tilting downwards. Luckily Itachi woke up before anything could happen. Sasuke mentally shuddered at the thought of an intruder sneaking around Shi's room. The youngest Uchiha had been sound asleep through the entire ordeal, only waking up when the bright flash had been activated. They didn't have a lot of chakra, so it's possible that it was someone with a lot of money. Sasuke added, remembering the hazy figure that had been standing in the passageway, and how much chakra they'd had. Certainly not as much as Naruto had, and Naruto was only half Uzumaki. Minato turned away from Fugaku, the latter leaving the room while the former moved closer to the table. "Naruto-kun, I'm sending you to the Uzumaki compound. I need you to give this report to your mother. I'd go myself but I'm already scheduled to be by the academy in an hour and I need to check in with the office." Minato tossed a scroll towards him and he caught it, wondering if he should read the words in the scroll. Probably not. Better to lay low after the failed Uchiha infiltration. Security would be heightened for a week or two at the very least. The academy? It had to be something important for him not to reschedule. Come to think of it, Shi-chan had absolutely insisted on going to the academy, despite what had happened to her brothers. Naruto stood and bowed to his father. "Understood." He turned to Sasuke, taking a moment to watch as the temporarily blinded Uchiha tried to eat an egg, missed and smeared it across his cheek instead. "See you later, Sasuke." He received an annoyed grunt in reply. Going to the Uzumaki compound could prove to be problematic. It was the heart of the biggest sensing clan in the village. If he reacted to anything oddly it would raise suspicions. Luckily, he was more experienced than he looked. Still, he'd already messed up once. He couldn't afford to do so again. Running across rooftops, Naruto wondered just how different the Uzumaki clan would be. His experience with them since returning to the present was rather limited. Perhaps he'd see Haruto, get to see a bit more of the clan customs and such. He dropped down at the compound entrance and waved at the guards. They knew who he was, yet they weren't sure if they should let him in or not. "Yo, I'm here to see my mother. I have a report from the Hokage." He held up the report. They waved him through and he carried on towards the main hall. He couldn't use his sensing to find his mother. He didn't want it to be known that he was an adept sensor. He wanted to make it look like he was trying to find his mother the long way. "Hello?" he called as he entered the main hall, noting the low lighting and the somewhat empty hallway. He moved further in when he didn't immediately see anyone. He could sense a few people further in. Looking around as he walked, he was pleased to see that mostly, the compound hadn't changed other than to take on a more aged appearance. Closer to the chakra signatures he could tell that they were underground, and somewhat hazy, which was weird. It meant he couldn't make out who owned the chakra or not. They had to be low enough to be under the village's barrier. Which meant they'd made a hole in the barrier. That wasn't very smart. Naruto frowned. Why would the Uzumaki do something so stupid? He paused to look around, unsure of if he should carry on in this room, or walk around the compound until he happened upon someone who could help him locate his mother. He was about to turn around and do just that, when one of the chakra signatures moved away from the others and moved closer to the surface. As they re-entered the barrier, he felt his mother's familiar signature wash over him. He frowned but continued to pretend to leave. "Naruto-kun?" His mother called to him as she sunshined into the main hallway, a few meters behind the blonde. "Ka-chan?" Naruto turned to his mom with a look of surprise. He wasn't acting either. He hadn't expected the sunshine. He walked towards her with a smile. "I have a report from To-chan." He held out the scroll and Kushina took it, her chakra showing her confusion. Perhaps she hadn't heard about the infiltration. Naruto waited, not sure if it was meant to get a reply or not, as his mother read through the report. Her chakra grew grimmer as she did so, with a hint of concern. "I'm sorry, Naruto-kun. I appear to be rather unable to assist in this matter. You'll have to tell your father to rule out Uzumaki sales. We don't sell flash seals. At least not one that could blind a Sharingan. We don't even know how to make something like that." Kushina rolled up the scroll, her features worried. Naruto kept his emotions carefully in check. He allowed worry to creep in, as that would be a natural response. "Then we're dealing with a sealing master. How many of those are there outside of the compound?" he asked, moving a hand to his chin thoughtfully. "Not sure. Anyone can study sealing. It's just that the Uzumaki are the best at it, so not many other people bother. It's also a time-consuming craft to learn." Kushina was stumped. He could feel it in her chakra. "At this point, we're going to have to wait and see. As much as it pains me to admit it, without any other further evidence we're out of options. They didn't use a weapon, so we can't identify the craftsmanship, and they didn't use any jutsu other than seals. We don't even know if it was an outside attack or a traitor from the inside. Without knowing what the person was after, it's even less likely that we'll catch them. They could have been going after Shi-chan. She's young enough to be manipulated for her Sharingan, and her family has already proven to be immensely proficient Sharingan users." Kushina rolled up the report and tucked it away. "I'll look through the records of known Uzumaki seals and see if perhaps there are any on invisibility or flashes. Could one of the weaker flash seals have been modified?" Naruto proposed the question as though he too was trying to solve the mystery. "No. I imagine the base seal would have been completely different. Anything powerful enough to blind a Sharingan would have been pure chakra, since the Sharingan sees the chakra pathways. Therefore it's entirely plausible that the flash was nothing more than an outburst of chakra." Kushina muttered. She seemed distant. "You should get back to your father. I'm sure Fugaku-sama is anxious enough as it is. Any information at this point would be most welcome." Naruto watched his mother sunshine from the room, no doubt going back to where she had come from. How did she know about the Sharingan? Madara had stressed absolute privacy on all Sharingan-related information. Coincidence? Or had the current Uchiha been a little more generous with their information? Naruto didn't linger, knowing it would appear suspicious to his mother. If she was even still looking out for his chakra. Perhaps he was looking in the wrong places. Perhaps this traitor wasn't a traitor at all? There was a possibility that this was an outside source, an infiltrator. As he exited the main hall, he sensed a familiar chakra signature walking towards him. He turned towards Tatsumaki as he rounded the corner. "Shouldn't you be at the academy?" Naruto asked, knowing full well that yes, the boy should. "I overslept." Tatsumaki replied innocently, adding a grin and everything. "I was just about to dash off when I saw you." Naruto sighed and rubbed the back of his head. "All right, I'll walk you there and maybe I can explain to Iruka-sensei." He had no idea as to what he was going to say though. Naruto paused for a moment, thinking that perhaps not explaining anything was better than even trying, before shrugging and lifting Tatsumaki up onto his back, ignoring the boy's squawk of surprise. "Let's make sure we don't even have to explain anything." Naruto grinned, focusing his chakra towards his feet where he'd have better access to the village seal matrix, and then immediately seeking out the academy. Naruto was careful to make it look like an ordinary sunshine as he disappeared from the Uzumaki compound and reappeared directly in front of Iruka-sensei, who immediately backed away, kunai in hand. "Sorry about that, Iruka-sensei," Naruto stated nervously, rubbing the back of his head. "My aim is a bit off. I was going for the classroom door." "And Naruto?" Iruka quickly put the kunai away, looking more than a little shocked. "Tatsu-kun was late for class," Naruto added with a grin. "So I thought I'd give him a hand, make an honest student out of him." To which Iruka snorted. Honest student, honestly Naruto-kun, you're the last one to talk. Tatsumaki hopped away from Naruto's back, his grin so large Naruto was sure he was going to split his cheeks. That was so cool. When do I learn how to do that? Naruto left the boy to run to his friends to tell them all about it. She, on the other hand, gave Naruto a narrowed gaze look twice in one morning. Naruto baka. You're really trying to ruin my day. Naruto was starting to think that girl was psychotic. Iruka shook his head and sighed. You're just going to make my job harder doing things like that. But there was a smile on his face, so Naruto just grinned. I'll stay and help out. Knock a few heads together if I need to. Naruto offered. In truth, he didn't really have anything else to do for the immediate moment. His father had mentioned he was coming to the academy, so he could relay the message from his mother when he arrived. Iruka studied him for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. A memory came to mind, and Naruto wondered if he should say something. You know, Iruka-sensei, you always did look out for me the best you could. Naruto smiled distantly. I know that I failed the academy graduation test and that it caused you a heck load of anxiety because of it. But don't worry. When I say I'm going to help you out, I don't mean that you'll have an extra headache on your hands. I've grown up a bit since the academy. Iruka looked startled for a moment, his gaze moving towards Naruto and out of his thoughts. Then he relaxed a moment later with a soft smile tugging at his lips and a slight blush deepening the color on his cheeks. Am I that readable, Naruto-kun? Naruto just grinned wider. He couldn't very well tell Iruka that it wasn't that he was that readable, it was more like Naruto was just that good of a censor. Better to let him make his own deductions. Well, I guess you can tag along. They're going to be a handful either way. We're trying something new today, Iruka sighed wearily. Naruto's curiosity piqued full force and he couldn't help but wonder what the academy was trying. Perhaps that was why his father was coming. We've been working on it for months, so the kids will be really excited. What are we doing? Naruto asked, looking towards the students, who sure enough, looked ready to bounce off the walls. Shi-chan was with Tatsu-kun, the two seeming to be comparing something. We've been given special permission to try out the Uzumaki Taijutsu training grounds, Iruka stated with a proud grin. First time ever that it'll be open to those outside of the clan for a few decades. The Uzumaki Taijutsu training grounds, huh? Naruto was quite familiar with it as he had built it himself. He was rather smug about that achievement. It was similar to the testing grounds Mito's father had taken him to all those years ago. Only this was meant to be more of an obstacle course, rather than a test. He'd even included a multitude of monitoring seals that would increase the difficulty of the course as a person trained so that they could continue to use the course. It was a live sealing array, so to speak. It changed and evolved as the participant did, really pushing them to their limits. Just before being sent back to the present, Naruto was the proud holder of the course record. He was a little confused as to why it had been closed off to the other clans, but things had changed in the last 50-odd years. So really he couldn't say why until he got there. Awesome. Sounds exciting indeed. Can't say I blame the kids. Naruto grinned. This might be fun. Maybe he could also give it a try. See if he could beat his old score. Probably not just yet. The Taijutsu training ground wasn't situated in the clan compound. It was right next to Training Ground 7. It was fairly large, with a small arena built around it. It used to be a source of healthy competition during the early formation of the village. A bonding experience, so to speak. Alright class, line up. The Hokage should be here any moment. Iruka addressed the gleeful students and they immediately moved into two straight lines. Naruto couldn't help the nervous sweat drop at the thought of disobeying Iruka-sensei. As though summoned, Minato arrived in a flash of yellow and Naruto was pleased at the reminder that his father had learned and built upon Tobirama's technique. Yo, To-chan. Naruto waved. Ka-chan told me to tell you that there aren't any Uzumaki flash seals sold to the public strong enough to blind a Sharingan. She's going to look into the seal directory and see if there's anything on invisibility and flash seals. Naruto didn't even give the poor man time to greet Iruka. Ah. Thank you, Naruto-kun. He didn't miss a beat and Naruto silently commended the fifth Hokage. Minato smiled warmly and asked, "Are you joining us today?" Naruto nodded, sounded fun. Alright Iruka-sensei, the marker has been set up, so if you could all please hold hands. Minato turned to the Chunin instructor who bowed slightly in greeting. Okay class, remember how we practiced. Iruka watched as the students nodded and grasped the hand of their peers. Iruka smiled and took hold of the hand of the child in front before offering his hand to the Hokage with a deep blush. Minato chuckled. Yosh. Alright Naruto-kun, you take my other hand. Naruto nodded and gripped his father's hand tightly. He'd seen the damage that Tobirama sustained getting this jutsu wrong. Minato had taken the jutsu far if he was able to transport this many. The activation came without warning. A slight jolt that was felt all the way to his chakra core, and suddenly they were standing in front of the Uzumaki training grounds. Naruto let out an explosive breath with a laugh. That's the weirdest feeling, Minato chuckled again. Oh yeah. I almost gave the technique a skip because of it. All of the students were handling the jump with varying degrees of nausea or laughter, and Naruto couldn't help the amusement at their predicament. Tatsumaki seemed to have recovered the fastest and ran over to Naruto, looking as though he was about to explode with happiness. That was so cool. Better than your jump, Naruto ni. Ma, I thought my jump didn't have as many drawbacks. Naruto scratched his chin thoughtfully. Eh? But your jump was just a shunshine. Tatsumaki argued. Naruto pretended to consider the argument before slumping his shoulders in defeat. I guess you're right, Tatsu-kun. The boy would maybe understand that it wasn't just a shunshine. One day. Maybe. Better to leave it for now before his father grew suspicious. Iruka looked pale, but he did his best to put on a stern face so that the students would fall into line without too much trouble. Alright class, we're going to do this exercise for most of the day. There will be an Uzumaki seal mater helping us today, so I want all of you on your best behavior. Hi sensei. The learners chorused while Minato walked over to aforementioned sealing master, who happened to be Haruto. The blonde Uzumaki greeted the Hokage with a short bow, quietly going over the logistics for the day before Minato nodded and opened a door that led to the seating part of the training ground. Naruto caught a glimpse of a still blindfolded Itachi before she squealed and rushed over to her brother. Naruto shook his head with a smile. He felt sorry for any suitor that she may have in the future given her overprotective brothers. Was Sasuke here as well? Stretching out his senses, he concluded that no, he wasn't. Alright class, let's move towards the seats. You'll be going in one at a time, so let's all be patient and work on having a good time. Iruka ushered the learners towards the door and Naruto followed, content to watch. However, Minato grabbed his jacket sleeve as he passed. Hold on Naruto-kun, you'll be the one demonstrating. Help to show the students what to expect. Hi? Naruto wondered what the plan had been before he decided to join the academy field trip for the day. Itachi maybe, who was now temporarily blinded. He walked over to Haruto, who greeted him politely. Naruto-san. Good to see you again. I look forward to your participation today, as someone who completed the trials. The reminder made Naruto sigh. He still had to see what was happening inside the clan. Hi. I'm glad there weren't any lasting repercussions for Tatsu-kun. Naruto nodded his head as he grinned. Shall we begin? Haruto asked. Naruto shrugged. He was ready to go when everyone else was. Up in the stands, Minato watched carefully. He'd been glad to see Naruto, and not really because it was his son. Selfishly, he wanted to see what the course would reveal about his son's abilities. It was hard to fool the sensing seals at the entrance. As each participant walked in, their chakra was automatically scanned and the level of the course set based on the information the scan provided. It was a good opportunity to see if what Naruto had been displaying was luck, or skill. The entrance to the course opened and Naruto waited a moment, listening to Haruto-san. Alright class, Naruto-kun is going to go first to give you all a demonstration of how the course works. Iruka instructed loudly enough for all the excited children to hear. If you see that screen over there, there's a list of the current top 10 performers that have ever taken this course. Iruka pointed towards a screen where the first name displayed was Uzumaki Naruto, the Shodai Hokage. Underneath that was Senju Hashirama, the Nidaime Hokage. High standards to work up towards indeed. The letters of names were shimmering slightly, displayed in the same blue hue of chakra, showing that this entire course relied on chakra. Naruto stepped forward and a blue chakra barrier activated, washing over the Namikaze for a moment before disappearing again. A screen opposite Naruto displayed 2 words and a number that made his heart freeze. Uzumaki Naruto, first. Was it too much to hope that no longer having Kurama influence his chakra would have made enough of a difference that the scanners didn't recognize him as the same person? Minato watched as Naruto's face paled, his eyes growing wide and panicked. He noted the screen, his own mind racing at the implications. They had seconds, mere seconds to act before the course activated. Minato sprang to his feet and rushed towards the railing that separated the seats from the course grounds. "Get out, Naruto," he yelled, his own voice sounding frantic. Naruto spun on his heel and tried to do just that, but a barrier warped into place, forcing Minato to let go of the railing. The slight buzz told him that touching the barrier wouldn't be a good idea. "To-chan," Naruto yelled, his breathing beginning to speed. "I can't do this." He wasn't exaggerating. He knew exactly what was about to happen. He'd adjusted the settings for his course runs. The barrier was so that those watching didn't get hurt from flying debris. The only way to shut it off was to complete the course, and what used to be a slightly workout for him was now a death trap. He hadn't had time to train his body and his chakra reserves to his previous level. There was no way this was going to end well. The course didn't have a failsafe when it was him, because foolishly that's exactly how he designed it. It wouldn't shut off even if his heart stopped beating. Worst case scenario, he was a decomposing corpse in a training field that would never be available to anyone else again. Best case scenario, he made it out of here alive. Miraculously. His best hope to do that was to spam high chakra cost maneuvers to get to the other side of the course and hit the off switch before getting beaten to hell and back by the actual course. Seemed doable if he considered his high chakra reserves. How much chakra would he need to move as fast, if not faster, than the course? Naruto closed his eyes and focused on his breathing. He could do this. He just had to be fast. There were students watching after all, and they didn't know what was going on. They didn't know there was a problem. Minato watched as Naruto grew calm, his eyes becoming determined. Had he come up with a plan? He moved to Iruka and said as quietly as he could, "Keep the kids calm for now. Tell them Naruto's on a much higher setting. Really emphasize that they won't have the same experience." Iruka nodded, having also gauged the seriousness of the situation. Minato moved towards Haruto, who was trying to get the system override working. His eyes were clenched shut in concentration, both palms on the ceiling array that controlled the course. It was glowing a faint turquoise, but otherwise, nothing moved. "I've managed to delay the start, but I'm not able to turn it off. Short of destroying the entire course, there's nothing we can do," Haruto admitted, his tone conveying his concern. The floor of the course shifted and Naruto immediately sprang into action, moving towards the other end of the course with a burst of speed that could only be aided by chakra. The course was largely run on Earth-style manipulations. A column of Earth sprang at Naruto's right and he avoided it by jumping up, only to be slammed by a column coming from his left. Minato heard the snap of the bone in Naruto's arm breaking and winced. Naruto didn't even cry out, and Minato wondered how much more the boy would be able to take. "Try again, Haruto-san, please." Minato flicked his gaze toward the Seal Master, inwardly wondering what good he was if he wasn't able to help. As though sensing his inner thoughts, Haruto responded, "Usually I'd be able to shut this down immediately, hell, there shouldn't even be a barrier. But the Shodai made modifications for his run. I can't fix this. Only the Shodai can." "But you're his son? Surely your chakra means something to the seal?" Minato knew enough about seals and chakra signatures to know that family had extremely similar chakra signatures. How did Naruto's chakra get confused for the Shodai's was anyone's guess at this point, but for now getting him out of there was the biggest priority. Haruto shook his head. "No. My father's chakra was something else entirely." In the arena, Naruto closed his eyes and relied completely on his sensing. That was the only way he'd managed to make it through the mountainside course all those years ago. Keeping his body loose would allow him the ability to react almost immediately. He needed to move instinctually. That was the only way this was going to work. Feeling the flow of the course was almost cheating, the barrier making it a little harder than it would have normally been, but he could sense enough. Twisting his body to the left and ducking low to avoid 3 columns of earth almost caused him to pull several ligaments. He may have been using chakra to aid his movement, but his body hadn't adjusted to the daring manipulations, and as such, a long recovery period after this was highly probably. 4 pillars forced him to form a Rasengan to smash his way through. Luckily, this present version of himself had figured out how to do it without shadow clones. Ducking into a newly formed ditch meant he avoided a blast of flame, but he felt the heat scorching his skin. Too close. The ditch shifted and he wasn't fast enough to duck out of it before he felt himself being flung into the air, where gusts of wind sliced into his skin, Naruto doing the best he could in covering his face. When he landed running to avoid the spikes shooting at him for all directions. Faster, faster, faster. Not fast enough. A spike dug into his shoulder, knocking the air right out of him, but he kept running. He had to. Minato bit his bottom lip as Haruto once again tried to override the seal. Naruto was burning their chakra at an alarming rate, too full of adrenaline to really register the damage his body was taking. He himself had tried to get into the barrier using his mark on Naruto's jacket, but it was useless. The barrier was solid. He pressed his palm to the ground, trying to see if he could go from underneath, but the barrier once again prevented any interference. Naruto was on his own, trying to get to a small ledge high above the course floor, where the seal to deactivate the entire thing was located. The closer Naruto got, the more vicious the course became. Right now the blonde was jumping from one flying rock to the other, the ground shaking as each rock hit the ground. The barrier's purpose became somewhat positive as it prevented any of the debris from hitting the students. A sudden wave of water crashed into Naruto, sending him several feet backwards and further away from the ledge. Minato was keeping careful track of his chakra. He was running out, fast. With the speed that the course was moving at, this would be over in minutes. Naruto. Minato had to physically hold himself back, lest he get too close to the barrier. Naruto lay on the ground panting and exhausted, feeling the course take a moment to reabsorb the water that had just cracked several of his ribs. Whatever he did next, had to be enough to get him to the other end. He was out of chakra, out of time. The longer the course went, the more difficult it was becoming. Underneath him, the swirling chakra of the village reminded him that perhaps he could try one last thing. Taking a deep calming breath, he stilled his body, absorbing the senjutsu around him. He wouldn't have long. 10 seconds at most, and therefore he had to absorb enough to get to the switch. With one large burst of speed that really would be a last resort, Naruto dashed towards the ledge. It was a last resort because the output of chakra far exceeded his chakra coil's capacity, straining them to an almost breaking point. If the burst was too much, he'd never manipulate chakra ever again. For a moment, a tiny, uninterrupted moment, Naruto was faster than the course. His fingers grasped the ledge and he pulled himself up with a desperation only felt a handful of times in one's life before slamming his free hand onto the seal that would end this nightmare. The active chakra in the course grounds froze before completely disabling, leaving nothing but the general chakra that ran through the village. Naruto felt his body relax as he let go of the ledge, his body falling the floor with a painful bone-jarring thud. The barrier disintegrated and Naruto suddenly felt stupidly happy. He'd done it. He'd managed to survive his own foolish course. It had definitely been more challenging than any other time he'd done it. But he'd managed. Despite himself, he began to laugh. "To-chan," he gasped between laughs, "was that how you feel every time you perform the Hiraishin no Jutsu?" He couldn't deny how exhilarating it had been. He was utterly exhausted, unable to move more than a few inches, but he couldn't stop the grin on his face. The recovery time for this adventure was so worth the trouble he'd gone through. Minato sighed and felt his entire body droop as the tension drained. His heart thundered painfully in his chest. He hadn't felt so useless in such a long time. That boy was going to give him a heart attack. The only other time something similar had happened was the day Naruto had been born. The entire village had lit up like a Christmas tree, Minato later learning that the village did that every time the Hokage left and came back. Sort of a greeting, an acknowledgement of their presence. It also served to let all the village occupants know. It had been implemented by the Shodai as a way to raise morale during the early stages of the village's formation, where the Shodai was required to leave the village often in order to resolve conflicts brought on by those that weren't too happy about the village's existence. Naruto felt the disturbance in the village's chakra a fraction of a second before the jutsu hit, coming from the village itself. How was that possible? The traitor? His heart thundered in his ears as he tried to force his body to move, to get out of the training ground. To-chan. Invasion. Was all he could manage before the jutsu activated. Naruto's laughter cut off suddenly so he could shoot his warning, his arms feebly trying to support his body weight so that he could stand. Something was wrong. Minato should have taken him to the hospital the moment the barrier went down. Minato rushed towards Naruto only to be blown backwards by a wind jutsu. The same jutsu launched Naruto into the air, the boy unable to do anything with his chakra exhaustion as a void seal suddenly opened in the training ground floor, a dark swirling mass of unknown origins. Minato didn't wait for the jutsu to stop, twisting around and getting a kunai from his pouch. He threw the kunai as hard as he could towards Naruto's limp form. He reappeared next to Naruto just as the wind jutsu cut off and chakra wire shot out of the void, wrapping around Naruto's ankle. Minato tried to grab Naruto's jacket, his hand, the waistband on his pants, anything. Before Naruto was yanked towards the void in the floor. If Naruto was pulled in, there was nothing he could do. He had no idea where that seal led. He wasn't fast enough as all he'd managed was to brush Naruto's fingers, watching as Naruto disappeared into the seal, a hand reaching towards him. Naruto sensed the chakra coming from the seal. He knew that being taken would not end well for him. He needed to get away. But he had nothing left. He had no way of getting free. Not in his current state. All he could do was watch as his father failed to grasp hold of him, as his father grew further away from him, as the void swallowed his vision. A hand grasped his, a chakra chain shooting past him, a sharp blade at the end. The chakra wire around his ankle was cut and he was yanked upwards so hard his shoulder dislocated. He found himself being carried away from the void seal fast enough to blue his vision. Who? Naruto? You okay? They'd stopped, the void no longer open as Haruto placed a seal over it, forcing it to close before the enemy on the other side could come through. Kakashi-sensei? Naruto asked, feeling nothing but pain, his world a dizzy blur of inconsistencies. When did you get here? Distantly he felt Sasuke and Sakura's chakra, Menma's too. Minato landed next to Kakashi, features grim. He's going into shock. We better get him to the hospital. Minato grasped Naruto's shoulder and Kakashi's arm, preparing to jump them to the emergency room. Haruto rushed over to them, eyes moving towards Naruto's ankle. It seems I accidentally cut Naruto as well. My deepest apologies, Hokage-sama. Don't apologize, Haruto-san. Without your quick thinking and chakra chains I don't know what we would have done. It was the last thing Minato said to those around them before the world lurched and they were standing in the hospital. Get me Tsunade, Minato yelled as a flurry of activity greeted their arrival. Naruto's brain finally gave out. The last thing he managed to comprehend was that the person on the other side of that void had been none other than Uchiha Madara, and that his chakra hadn't been threatening at all. Chapter 24. The room was dark when he woke and relatively free of people. Only his mother was there, sleeping in the chair next to his bed. Naruto wasn't exactly disappointed. He needed the time to think. First, how was Madara still alive? Second, how had he known where Naruto was? Third, would he try it again? Fourth, did he have inside help? To the first question, there were a number of possibilities. None of them ones he could prove until he got to speak to Madara directly. It would explain why the village allowed the invasion in the first place. Madara, as a key founding member, would have his chakra keyed into the seal matrix. He'd have no trouble coming and going. To the second question, Madara may have known where he was using the village seal matrix, but that was unlikely given that in order to use the matrix as Naruto did, one needed to be a sealing master. So it was more likely that Madara had someone on the inside which would answer the fourth question. The man was still considered part of the clan, but perhaps not part of the village. Would he try it again? Maybe not like that. Everyone would be too on edge now. His father wouldn't allow him out of the village, and he'd probably have a security detail on his butt the moment he moved in any direction. Well, at least until everyone was sure that there wasn't a threat anymore. Problem was, with Madara still around, and the tailed beast seals being broken, Naruto was in desperate need of finding out just how many were still left and how many had been stolen. Madara knew what was in those boxes, and worse still, knew that Naruto was needed to open those boxes. Taking a moment to assess his body, Naruto concluded that he was going to be in the hospital for a little while yet. Without Kurama he wouldn't heal as quickly and there was only so much medical ninjutsu could do, even if it had been Tsunade treating him. Right now, with regards to Madara, the only thing he knew for certain was why the Uchiha was after him. There was no way that Madara could know about his Shodai awareness, so to speak. If Madara knew what Hashirama had done, he had no way of knowing if Naruto would pop up as a separate entity, or if he'd integrate into his younger self's mind as he had done. More importantly, there was no way for the man to know when he'd arrive. Not definitely. Hashirama could have done all the calculations he wanted, but at the end of the day, time travel was a fickle thing. If he'd been just slightly off, then Naruto might not have survived the trip at all. Therefore, with certainty, he could say that Madara wanted the Naruto of this time. The Genin dead last son of the 5th Hokage, not the Shodai. If they couldn't get chakra from Tatsumaki and Arashi anymore, then Naruto was the next best place to try. Only, that hadn't worked. So what would Madara do now? Assuming Madara had been the one to place those seals in the first place. 0.0.0.0 Minato approached Naruto's room deep in thought. He had a moment in his schedule and he wanted to visit his son. Naruto had been in the hospital for almost 2 weeks now, giving the nurses a hard time, trying to escape every other day. The only reason the boy was lying there at all was thanks to Haruto-san's paranoia. The man had placed summoning seals similar to the Flying Thunder God seals on Arashi's teammates in case of emergencies. Kakashi's speed and Haruto's chains had saved his son. Kakashi's quick intellect also being a key factor. He'd arrived, taken in the situation and reacted a second after, getting to Naruto with the same speed that made the Chidori possible. More than what Minato had been able to do. The blonde Hokage poked his head around the door to see Naruto sitting in the bed, staring out the window. "Naruto-kun." Minato greeted, glad to have caught the teen at a quiet moment. Apparently Tatsumaki had taken to visiting Naruto every day. Naruto turned towards Minato and smiled. "To-chan. I heard you were getting pretty bored. Feel like going on a small trip?" Minato grinned apologetically at his son, trying to convey more than what he'd said in words. Naruto sensed his chakra, felt his father's regret at having not come sooner as well as not having been able to do anything to rescue him in the first place. "Like this?" Naruto raised a brow, gesturing at himself in the plain hospital clothing he wore. Minato shrugged, "All the important bits are covered. We're just jumping somewhere. I'll have you back in 10 minutes. 20, tops." Minato even gave a thumbs up. "Does Tsunade Baka know?" Naruto narrowed his gaze and Minato laughed. "Yes. She said going out under supervision would be good for you. Besides, we're going to a Sealing Wonder site. I thought you'd be excited for that." Naruto stood and stretched. "If she said I can go, then I probably won't need to be in the hospital for much longer." He grinned and pulled his shoes out of the cupboard next to the bed. He hopped over to his father as he pulled them on. Not having Kurama helping to heal his wounds had made a serious impact on his recovery rate. While still impressive, it was nowhere near his previous levels. Annoyingly enough. Minato gripped his shoulder and the world lurched to the side before tipping back into place, and suddenly a blast of sand covered his entire right side. Naruto covered his mouth and squeezed his eyes shut to avoid getting sand in unwanted places. "Suna then." "Otosan." Menma's curt politeness explained where Minato's marker had been for him to have made the jump. "We managed to uncover the sealing matrix and disable the security seals. It's the same as all the others we've been to so far." It seemed the older of the Namikaze offspring was choosing to ignore Naruto's presence. Naruto opened his eyes slowly, taking in the vast golden landscape. Distantly he felt the razor-sharp chakra signatures of Suna Nin. One of them was oddly familiar. He couldn't quite place it, however. "Did this one give you as much trouble as the other three?" Minato asked, accepting a report that Menma held out to him. His earlier assessment of leaving the seals alone was proving to be troublesome. The Shodai's seals were being broken in quick succession, almost as though there was a time element involved. "No. At this point we've devised countermeasures that are proving to be effective. The Shodai may have been a brilliant seal master, but his seals are somewhat predictable." Menma shrugged, not even batting an eye at the insult he so casually gave. Naruto on the other hand had to stop himself from frowning. His seals were not predictable. Each one had been designed differently. For example, the one in Suna was designed to bury the intruder in a sand pit before hardening the sand with a lightning jutsu. How were they all being avoided? "Where is it?" Minato asked, looking around but seeing nothing but sand. Menma waved them towards the Suna Nin chakra signatures. "This way." He glanced at Naruto before asking, "Is he supposed to be here?" "I thought the fresh air would do him good." Minato shrugged. Truthfully, it was the only solution he'd come up with that enabled him to spend time with his son. Naruto trailed along behind his father and older brother, letting his thoughts wander. Konoha didn't really have an alliance with Suna, but there was a strong bond between the villages from Naruto's time as the Shodai. Would that bond weaken over time? As it was, Konoha didn't need the help. By poaching clans from all over the elemental nations, they'd easily become the largest and most powerful. If the other 4 villages banded together? Well then perhaps they'd have a problem. As they neared the site, Naruto felt the residual chakra of his seal matrix snapping in the air. It had been freshly broken, and violently at that. The previous sealing wonder he'd visited was different. It had been carefully analyzed and even more carefully worked through to ensure the best possible outcome, with the only drawbacks having been accidental. Was Madara running out of time? He wasn't a seal master, last Naruto checked. The sealing site was in utter chaos. Naruto was at a loss for words. The entire area was a complete ruin. He was surprised he hadn't seen it as soon as they'd arrived. To be fair, desert heat waves were pretty misleading. The Suna nin he'd sensed earlier approached wearily, having been assisting with the cleanup as best they could. Naruto noticed the red hair first, and the familiar chakra signature suddenly stood out in more ways than the brightness of the strands ever could. Gaara. Smiling. Good afternoon, Hokage-sama. Gaara gave a short bow. On behalf of my father, and the Hidden Sand, we'd like to express our deepest gratitude for your assistance. He apologizes for not coming himself, but has some urgent matters to attend to. Gaara had never looked so peaceful. Naruto took a moment to simply gawk at the teen. It was a wonder he was even alive. After all, his entire existence had been to become a Jinchuriki. Then again, Menma existed and that hadn't happened before, so anything went. It was good to note that he didn't have the scar on his forehead. No worries, Gaara-kun. I know how hard you tried to convince him to come, Minato chuckled, seeming to know the red-haired Suna nin well. Perhaps they knew each other from diplomatic meetings. This is my youngest son, Naruto-kun. Minato gestured towards Naruto, whose jaw was still hanging. Please excuse his appearance. He's supposed to be in the hospital, recovering from some serious injuries. I just thought this would be a great opportunity to introduce you to Naruto. Gaara is the Yondaime Kazekage's youngest son, and also training to become the next Kazekage. Naruto schooled his features and offered his hand. Good to meet you. He added a large grin for good measure. And you. Gaara gave a small smile, while shaking his hand. Are you sure you're supposed to be out of the hospital? Naruto shrugged. If I haven't collapsed yet, I should be good to go. All pleasantries aside, what can you tell us about the seal? Minato asked, features turning grim. Gaara turned towards the ruin, and so did Naruto, seeing the destruction around them in the way that no one else could. This had been the site for Shukaku. Naruto had used earth style to create a structure underneath the sand dunes. Something that wouldn't draw attention. Then he'd carefully hidden it with the sand as well as placed numerous seals. In front of them was a crater. One deep enough to have completely decimated the earth-style structure he'd created. It was anyone's guess as to whether or not they'd found the box. Blowing the entire place to hell meant they had run the risk of losing what they'd come here for in the explosion. It happened 2 nights ago, Gaara stated. The explosion was big enough that it reached us all the way in the village, both visually and physically. The good news is, there wasn't any lasting damage to the village's infrastructure. Unfortunately, whoever did it was gone by the time we arrived. Big enough to completely destroy the security seals, huh? Naruto muttered. Even though seals never truly disappeared, if you took away the surface they were created on, then most of the time it stopped the seal from being able to function. Effective, even if it wasn't very elegant. Problem was, elegant was Madara's style. This large-scale level of destruction was completely different from what he'd have expected of the Uchiha. Then again, it had been a couple decades. Things could change. I see. No evidence either. The explosion wasn't created using chakra, so we can't even track it using sensor-type shinobi. Whoever we're dealing with is far more capable than we thought. How do the Uchiha tie into this? Minato scratched at his chin thoughtfully. If I may, I believe that the Uchiha incident is perhaps a separate incident. There is nothing to suggest that whoever is breaking the seals is the one who broke into the Uchiha district 2 weeks ago, Menma stated softly, eyes fixed on Naruto. How's the investigation going? Naruto asked, not at all disturbed by the calculating gaze. No one tells me anything. And for good reason. We're currently in front of shinobi from another village. Why would I tell you top secret details of an ongoing investigation right in front of them? It wasn't a question, and for once Menma had some emotion in his tone. Problem was, it was anger. Gaara had enough decorum to look embarrassed and coughed into his hand, pretending not to be listening. Excuse my sons. They don't get along very well. Ever, Minato stated blandly. Although Menma does have a point. Naruto just grumbled under his breath about not being the one who brought up the Uchiha incident in the first place. Still, this was worrisome on a whole new level. Kurama would be laughing at him if he was here to see just how badly Naruto's tailed beast sealing plan was going. If I may ask, I heard that this sealing site wasn't the only one that's been destroyed. Gaara asked, looking at the ruins again. Naruto frowned, wanting to know more himself, since he was unable to go look unless Minato was planning more trips. Highly unlikely though. Hi. Of the 8, we've been to 5, and all 5 of them have been compromised. It stands to reason that this has been happening for some time now. Menma answered, looking more frustrated than Naruto thought he should. What claim did Menma have in all this? It's highly possible that the other three have also been compromised. Or will be in the coming weeks. Hearing that only made Naruto's heart heavy. He walked closer to the edge of the crater, taking in the sight with growing unease. The brutality of it all spoke of a desperation that should not exist in such peaceful times. Madara, what have you done? Naruto whispered to himself, knees going weak as he realized just what was happening. What happened to our dream? What happened to everything we were working towards? Hashirama, me and you. We worked so hard only for you to go and do this? Why? Naruto-kun? Minato asked, his tone conveying his concern. Do you know what this is? Naruto schooled his features, ensuring that none of his thoughts showed on his face and replied, no. I don't, but whatever it was, someone didn't want it getting out, and probably for a very good reason. A very, very good reason. After all, a tailed beast was nothing to laugh at. What makes you think it was something that could get out? Menma raised a brow in suspicion. What else would be in there? From what I've seen, these ceiling areas are awfully big for something that can't do much else other than sit there. Naruto shrugged, decided to play the fool. No, there wasn't any immediate evidence that whatever these ceiling areas held would be a living thing. Only Madara and Naruto knew what was sealed in them. Ironically, they housed boxes, the boxes being completely unable to move on their own and being completely sealed and only Naruto able to open them. For what it's worth, there aren't any food or water supplies in the ruins. I don't think anyone or anything could have survived in there unless the seal was preserving something no longer alive, or keeping it in a state of suspended animation. Gaara offered. Unfortunately, I've been told that with the seal area so thoroughly destroyed, we can't say what the purpose of the seals were. Naruto knew that Suna had a pretty decent sealing library thanks to some of the Uzumaki from the wandering fraction settling in the village. After all, Gaara was a descendant of one of those Uzumaki. If they'd found nothing, then he was inclined to believe them. To-san, you should get Naruto back to the hospital. You know how Tsunade-san gets. Menma muttered, eyes on the ruins. Naruto wondered if there was anything more he could do here. He knew more about these seals, but he was also hindered in that something told him to keep it to himself. Minato chuckled nervously, placing a hand on Naruto's shoulder. Thank you for taking the time to meet with us, Gaara-san. It was rather educational, seeing the area for myself. Reports don't always convey the true gravity of the situation. Before Naruto had a chance to say anything to Gaara himself, he was standing back in his hospital room, sand pouring out of his shoes and onto the floor. Just what was he supposed to do now? 0.0.0. Yo. Sasuke's greeting was lazy, yet somehow not in the same way as someone would describe Shikamaru's greeting. Naruto looked up from his novel and grinned in reply. Sasuke had been spending most of his free time training, mostly motivated by the Uchiha invasion. Naruto squirmed a bit, inwardly still guilty about temporarily blinding Itachi and Sasuke. He was glad the teen was better. Yo. Naruto's greeting wasn't as cheerful as it might have been had he not broken into Sasuke's house some time earlier. Sasuke walked further into the room but didn't approach too closely. His expression was light, neutral even. He was simply visiting out of courtesy, and not necessarily out of desire to see how a close friend was doing. Sakura hadn't once seen him outside of training with Tsunade, which apparently she'd begun. Suddenly, as though being drenched in icy water, Naruto felt utterly alone. Drifting in a sea of secrets, further and further away from those around him. Before, he'd always had Kurama. Then he had those precious to him, then Madara and Hashirama, then Izuna and Tobirama, then a clan, and finally a whole village. Now he had no one. Not really. And it was lonely, utterly and completely so. He made the decision before he could talk himself out of it and hopped out of the bed. What are you doing? Sasuke huffed indignantly as Naruto pushed him further into the room and shut the door. There was an Anbu station nearby, so Naruto would have to use seals to make sure that whatever they ended up talking about wasn't overheard. Just trust me. Naruto waved a hand as he stared at the door. Focusing his chakra towards his fingers, he carefully traced out the seal onto the wood, leaving it to glow slightly. He moved to the window and did the same seal. You're kind of good with seals. Sasuke noted blandly. I don't think I ever saw Arashi using seals so casually. Naruto huffed in amusement, noting without thinking, Arashi's a child. Of course he'd be hesitant. For good reason too. Many things can go wrong. Sasuke didn't comment, but it was one of the strangest things about Naruto. Sometimes when he spoke he sounded more like an old man than a genin. Anyway, Naruto continued. Can you keep a secret? That's a loaded question, Naruto. Sasuke replied carefully. If it's major, you know I can't. I have a duty to the village after all. He gave Naruto a look that dared him to say anything that would force Sasuke to rat on him. It was a tough place to be, and that fact that Sasuke would still choose the village over whatever Naruto was potentially hiding, made the feeling of being alone that much more acute. You know what, that's fair. I can respect that. I'll just tell you anyway and you can decide for yourself. Naruto moved to the bed and sat down. Sasuke stayed where he was, eyes suspicious. Naruto wasn't exactly normal and Sasuke was starting to suspect more than just not seeing the genin for a few years. There were things that he was running about logical explanations for, and sooner or later, he'd either have to confront Naruto or go to the Hokage. I'm a sensor-type shinobi, Naruto stated simply, eyes on his hands. So? How's that a secret? Sasuke furrowed his brows together in confusion, almost, relaxing in relief at the harmless information. Not just a sensor type. A really good sensor, Naruto continued, ignoring Sasuke's question. And there are things about the village that I know because of this. For example, your brother's room isn't connected to the village's seal matrix. In fact, it's completely blocked from sensors, top to bottom. At this, Naruto looked up at Sasuke, the expression on his face decidedly guilty. Sasuke took exactly 3 seconds to connect the dots. Tell me that wasn't you, Sasuke hissed, eyes narrowed in anger as his muscles tensed. It was me. Honestly, I wasn't sure I'd even find anything and I was literally there for like 5 seconds. Your brother is amazing. I didn't even make a sound and he just knew I was there. Naruto was rambling, but he didn't like Sasuke's anger. He wasn't making it better though. Sasuke's chakra was boiling and Naruto inwardly cringed. The Uchiha tisked and turned towards the door. There is a serious investigation going into that, Naruto. Wasting time and resources. I've got to let them know. He'd made it to the door, his hand on the handle. Wait. Sasuke, please, just hear me out. Naruto dashed off of the bed once again. He was surprised when Sasuke really did stop, hand on the doorframe, waiting to see what Naruto would say. Something's going on. Something big. Naruto was pleading now. Perhaps he wanted Sasuke to tell him he was crazy. Perhaps he wanted the help. He wasn't sure. Sasuke's hand left the door and he turned towards Naruto, looking more confused than angry. What are you talking about? Those sealing wonders, someone's breaking them, and as far as I can see, that's not a good thing. Besides, don't tell me Itachi isn't at least a little bit strange these days. I sensed something that one time you were talking to me about surpassing him. Naruto really hoped he wasn't asked to explain how these two things were related. That one time, when we were at your house, I saw my brother arguing with your brother, and what if they know something? They're supposed to be geniuses. Sasuke sighed, his shoulders relaxing. You really are an idiot, aren't you? Naruto didn't know where this was going, but that didn't stop the deadpan expression on his face. How the heck do you connect Itachi to those sealing wonders? They have disagreements all the time. You know, the whole genius thing. Besides, you need to know sealing in order to break a sealing wonder, which Itachi knows nothing but the basics of. I can't believe you broke into my house over this. So Itachi likes his privacy, big deal. Sasuke squeezed the bridge of his nose, inwardly relaxing as Naruto's supposed familiar stupidity took center stage. Naruto kept his features light. He placed a hand at the back of his head and forced the embarrassed laugh. Well, when you put it that way, I guess it really does sound stupid, doesn't it? He couldn't explain further without revealing too much, and Sasuke was just so young, so innocent. Naruto really couldn't involve him. I'm sorry I broke into your house. I really wasn't there for long. Sasuke seemed to have completely forgotten all about the level of seals Naruto had been using that night. If he had perhaps taken them into consideration, then maybe he'd realized that Naruto wasn't as much of an idiot as he currently believed. Naruto felt the distance between himself and those around him increase just that much more at the failure the conversation had been. 0.0.0.0 Naruto was able to leave the hospital and go home 2 days after his failed talk with Sasuke. The Uchiha had been nice enough not to tell his father who had broken in, knowing that not everyone would treat the situation as lightly as he had. Naruto was now in his room, back to staring at the ceiling. Something was coming. Someone was trying to take him. Someone knew that he was necessary to open the boxes. And that someone was Uchiha Madara. A man that should not be alive, just as Naruto should not know who he was. If they were looking at the way the world was supposed to be anyway. For all he knew, Madara got here the same way he went to the past. With a heavy sigh, Naruto sat up and walked towards the kitchen. The house was relatively quiet. It was almost always quiet with everyone away on missions or clan training or Hokage duties. It was lonely. A memory swam into focus, hazy but still conveying a sense of longing. Naruto smiled and closed the fridge door, having been staring into its depths with no real intentions of taking anything out. Focusing his chakra, Naruto disappeared from the Namikaze residence, probably giving the Anbu guard a heart attack before reappearing outside of the Sarutobi clan compound. Besides, he wasn't supposed to know he had a guard anyway. He waved at the gate guard before casually entering the compound. He'd been here so many times before he was surprised he hadn't realized to come here sooner. Sarutobi Hiruzen was more like a grandfather figure to him than he'd been the first time around. Having given Minato the hat shortly after Naruto's birth, the man had more time on his hands. He had also visited the Namikaze residence fairly often, giving Minato advice where he could. He knocked on the door, waiting a moment before being greeted by Sarutobi Asuma. "Ah, Naruto-kun. Here to see the old man?" Asuma smiled widely, used to seeing Naruto at his front door. "Yo, Asuma-sensei. Is he around?" Naruto asked, returning the grin and walking into the house as Asuma stepped back. He pulled off his shoes as Asuma pointed towards the dojo. "Yeah, we're helping Konohamaru-kun master some jutsus. It's his team's off day." It was hard to keep track of where people were in this present. Konohamaru was already a Jinan. "Thanks, Asuma-sensei." Naruto walked with the man towards the dojo, hearing determined yells and loud bangs. Slowly, "Konohamaru-kun, patience." The soft rumble of the Yondaime's voice reached them as they entered the dojo. Konohamaru turned towards them, seeing Naruto and not really reacting. Naruto's memories didn't supply much interaction with the boy. He was far less enthusiastic in this timeline as Konoha was far too vast for many of the people to recognize him as the Yondaime's grandson on sight. Well, that and Naruto caused enough of a stir to take the attention away from the young boy. Naruto waved and Konohamaru gave a half wave back, taking the distraction as a moment to catch his breath. Naruto surveyed the damage in the dojo and concluded that they might be practicing the Shuriken Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. "Yo, Gigi." Naruto moved closer to the Yondaime, who was seated in a position that would mean he was safe from any stray flying projectiles. "Ah, Naruto-kun. Haven't seen you in a while. How did the training go?" Naruto had learnt the basics of the Rasengan from the man seated in front of him, and Hiruzen been the one to suggest the 4-week training session in the forest. Ironically, he'd been the one to teach the Rasengan to Hiruzen in the first place, so really, it was like coming full circle. In reply to the old man's question, he lifted a hand and focused his chakra, a small blue ball forming in his palm. "Oh, wonderful." Hiruzen smiled. "I hear you've been placed on a team now. How's that going?" Naruto let the Rasengan fade before rubbing the back of his head. Not too bad. They're a good team. How's Konohamaru's training going?" He turned the top half of his body to face the boy, who was nodding along to whatever Asuma was instructing him on. "He's got potential." Naruto added distantly, thinking of the boy from so long ago. "He's rushing. He got promised today, but we don't really know when we can help him again. A retired Hokage, well, isn't very retired. I know about the Sealing Wonders and the attempted abduction." Sarutobi's tone was serious, treating Naruto more like an adult than what he had in previous visits. "Hi. It's getting weird out there, Gigi," Naruto agreed. "Maybe I can help him." Naruto turned back to Konohamaru. Sarutobi waved him away, interested to see what Naruto would come up with. "All right, Konohamaru, one more try," Asuma stated, backing away while the smaller Sarutobi nodded. He picked up a shuriken and focused his chakra before tossing it and quickly performing the hand signs. The shuriken wobbled, developed a sort of mutated shuriken double, but otherwise, did not multiply before hitting the post. At least it hit the post on target. Naruto was impressed with that. Ni, Konohamaru." Naruto approached the boy with his hands behind his head. "Can I show you a trick? Maybe not trick, but something that helps me with this jutsu." The boy inclined his head in consideration before shrugging. "Sure." Naruto scooped up a shuriken from the box next to Asuma and held it in his palm. If you coat the shuriken in a small layer of your chakra, It sort of guides the jutsu you're trying to perform. Naruto put a little more chakra than necessary into the shuriken so that it would be a visible blue layer. These old guys forget that part because they learnt this jutsu after they'd learnt to augment their shuriken throws with chakra. Naruto explained before putting the shuriken down on the ground and performing the hand signs. The lone shuriken was suddenly surrounded by hundreds just like it, making Konohamaru leap backwards in surprise. Wow! That's so cool. Not even Gigi makes that many. Konohamaru looked more like his other self and Naruto grinned at the nostalgia. I overdid it a bit. But the concept can really apply to any ninja tool you use. If you get really good, you can apply it to jutsu too. Naruto created a tiny, very tiny, Rasengan in his palm, adding only enough wind chakra to make it fly a small distance. The disadvantage with the small distance was the lack of time he'd have to perform the hand signs. Luckily he had this jutsu down to a single hand sign. He flicked the tiny Rasengan and suddenly it was 10 tiny Rasengans whose landing created a small hole in the training ground floor. Naruto laughed and rubbed the back of his head. Sorry about the whole Gigi. Konohamaru seemed speechless. Asuma had dropped the lighter that he'd been about to light a cigarette with. What has Kakashi been teaching you? He muttered, bending down to pick it up again. Hiruzen, on the other hand, was contemplatively silent. That mastery of the Rasengan was not possible with the amount of time Naruto had been training. In fact, it was highly possible that Minato would have trouble with that level of mastery, and he'd been particularly exceptional with the Rasengan. Not to mention his mastery of the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. To apply it to a jutsu was unthinkable. Something only an Uzumaki would be crazy enough to try, especially a jutsu such as the Rasengan. That boy sure was a wonder. Alright Konohamaru, you give it a try. Naruto ruffled the stunned boy's hair before walking back to the older Sarutobi. He'd noticed the negative drop in the man's chakra. The kind of negativity that would mean he was thinking too hard and was probably the right amount of suspicious. Gigi, do you think he'll get it? Naruto was hoping to distract the man. Come Naruto-kun, let's leave these two. There's something we must discuss. Sarutobi stood, his aged joints cracking in protest. Konohamaru's disappointment was dampened by his excitement to try the jutsu again. Asuma watched silently, not as suspicious as his father, merely curious. Naruto was wary. What did the older Sarutobi want to know? The old man was in no hurry, leading him to the personal study where Naruto knew there were a number of high-level privacy seals. He'd put those seals there himself, so he was sure that whatever Hiruzen wanted to talk about it was going to be very serious. Hiruzen seated himself behind the small table and invited Naruto to seat himself as well. Naruto sat carefully, wondering how long the conversation was going to be. So Naruto-kun, or rather, should I say Naruto-sama, why haven't you said anything to Namikaze Minato about your presence? Hiruzen asked politely, taking a deep puff from his pipe, not in any hurry to have Naruto answer, but his gaze was penetrating. Naruto had mere seconds to decide how to reply, given that his reactions were key if he planned on lying. Chapter 25. Now before you say anything. Hiruzen started, taking a puff from his pipe, because I can see the denial on your face, Naruto-kun. And I can call you kun, since you're younger than me. After all, you died at around my eldest son's age. Hiruzen chuckled, honestly enjoying this fact more than Naruto thought he should. It's fascinating to see how similar you are to Namikaze Naruto. The man paused yet again, appearing to mentally compare the two Narutos in his mind for a moment before continuing. Let me start by engaging in an old man's pastime, by telling you some stories from my youth. Naruto relaxed a little and nodded, still choosing to keep silent. I remember the day my father Sarutobi Sasuke, the then clan head of the Sarutobi clan, received the invitation to join Konoha. Senju Tobirama was an imposing man, young, powerful and intelligent beyond his years. Worse still, he knew it. Hiruzen paused to chuckle. Hiruzen threw the shuriken, watching its path intently as it sailed towards the post. It was a hot day, the sun glinting off the metal, reflecting back at Hiruzen almost painfully. The sudden commotion by the compound gates caused him to look away and miss the shuriken's landing. He immediately started running towards the gates, eager to see what had the guards so noisy, training all but forgotten. He hadn't gone more than 2 feet before his father barked out, Hiruzen, stay out of it. This doesn't concern you. His father was sharper than most would give him credit for. He was a quiet shinobi, preferring to think first and act later. It was a trait that garnered him a lot of respect from the other clans. His judgments were often astoundingly accurate. Hiruzen hunched his shoulders and pouted. His father ruffled his hair with a soft smile. Go back to your training. The pout disappeared, turning into a mischievous grin. That hadn't been an order. He waited for his father to walk around the corner before scaling the wall and carefully working his way towards the gate, trying to be as quiet as possible. It was good training. A lone shinobi stood at the gate's entrance. He appeared patient, his posture one of a man born into high ranking. He couldn't have been more than 20, yet towering over the shinobi guard who was pointing a tanto's blade in his direction. He didn't appear fazed by the tanto, staring at the gates as he waited, perhaps for Sasuke to appear. Put the blade down, I will deal with this man. Sarutobi Hiruzen matched the man's posture, only there was a grace to the older shinobi that the younger had yet to learn. After all, Senju Tobirama is a man who should only be treated as a guest. Hiruzen's eyes widened. Senju Tobirama? No way? He'd only ever heard stories of the man. Looking at him now, comparing him to the stories he'd heard, Hiruzen couldn't help the excited glee bubbling in his chest. That glee turned to ice the moment Tobirama's sharp gaze slid over to his spot on the roof. He would have ducked out of sight, if his body were able to move past the shock. The gaze was piercing, seeing a world that Hiruzen could only imagine. Strangely, there was a measure of expectation as well. What the man could be expecting was anyone's guess. Hiruzen was hardly older than 7, still young by Sarutobi standards. However, by Senju standards one could say he was greatly lacking. Was that what Tobirama was looking for? No, it was something else. Something more. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it was gone, leaving Hiruzen free to take a deep breath. Senju Tobirama. A fearsome shinobi indeed. Hiruzen watched as his father walked with Tobirama to the meeting room, not daring to follow this time. There were some things he wouldn't be able to sneak past his father, and this was one of them. It was only later that I learned that we had received the invitation to join Konoha. We didn't accept right away. My father was a careful man. He was no fool to the dangers such a dream as Konoha would face. He waited, wanting to see how the newly formed village would fare against outside threats. He also wanted to see how it would affect the warring clan states. If two fated enemies could come together, then perhaps there was hope. Hiruzen put his pipe down, eyes distant with the memory of his father. A few months passed before my father made decision. And so we packed up and moved towards Konoha. The day we arrived, well, that was quite a memorable experience. Hiruzen's shirt was being pulled backwards by his father, to stop the boy from running ahead. They'd been traveling for weeks, slowly making their way from the Sarutobi compound to Sunagakure. To say that Hiruzen was excited would be an understatement. They'd finally spotted the village gates, and Hiruzen wanted nothing more than to drop the pack from his shoulders and run towards the awe-inspiring gates. Konoha had quite literally sprung up overnight, the prowess of Uzumaki Naruto known far and wide. That feat alone was enough to convince Sasuke to move the clan to join Konoha's ranks. The other major factor in his decision had been the village's defenses. That alone was the reason Sasuke stopped Hiruzen from dashing forwards. He didn't know if there were any security seals that would activate. They'd all heard the tales of the nigh impenetrable village walls, protected by an array of seals so complex that there had yet to be a secure way found to infiltrate. Not too many had tried, but enough had to garner the newly created village a deadly reputation. The village did not deal with intruders kindly. Holding on to Hiruzen's shirt no longer became necessary, as the boy was forced to spring backwards due to the sudden arrival of one very orange-looking shinobi. Yo! Hiruzen gawked at the man in orange armor, with hair sunnier than the brightest day and eyes squeezed shut with the force of his large grin. My name is Uzumaki Naruto. I'm so glad you decided to accept our invitation. The Sarutobi clan is most welcome in Konoha. Sasuke was quicker to recover, keeping calm and bowing to Naruto with a soft greeting. We are honored to have been considered. Standing with the prestigious clan such as those who founded Sunagakure is more than I could have asked for in my lifetime. Naruto's grin widened, and as his eyes opened, Hiruzen found himself lost at sea. This man was the feared Uzumaki Naruto? So you're Sarutobi Sasuke? Naruto leaned in to examine the Sarutobi clan head, taking note of his appearance with a critical eye. After all, to Naruto, this was the man who was Uchiha Sasuke's namesake. I would love to spar with you. When you've settled, of course, Naruto stated with a large grin, while Sasuke felt himself grow nervous. He was no stranger to Uzumaki Naruto's reputation. The man was a monster of a shinobi. This is my son, Hiruzen. Sasuke felt the change of topic was needed. He gestured to the starstruck boy at his side, who had yet to close his mouth since Naruto's arrival. Naruto's face seemed to twitch slightly as his gaze moved to the young Sarutobi. He blinked, slowly raising a hand and placing it on Hiruzen's dark brown locks. Hiruzen held his breath and dared not move a muscle, not really sure what this all-amazing shinobi was doing. Gigi. Naruto suddenly snorted, moving his hand away from Hiruzen's head and towards his torso scarcely higher than what could be Naruto's navel, where Hiruzen now understood that Naruto had been measuring his height. Before anyone could ask why Naruto had called the small boy an old man, Uzumaki Naruto burst out laughing and kept on laughing for a full 10 minutes. Every time it appeared he was finished, he simply had to look at the poor pouting Hiruzen and he'd burst into peals of laughter anew. Ah! That laughter! He did it for 2 whole weeks. Can't say I was a fan, Hiruzen chuckled. I would be walking through the village and somewhere off in the distance I must have caught the Shodai's attention because suddenly all I would hear was his laughter. He never explained why and no one was brave enough to ask. He eventually stopped because Tobirama-sensei would smack him upside the head every time he started laughing. These are very interesting stories, but I don't see what they have to do with me being the Shodai. Naruto was careful in his wording. He was testing the waters. There were too many unknowns at this point for him to be sure that he could trust Hiruzen completely. Ah, but I'm only at the beginning. Patience. Hiruzen smiled chidingly, as though lecturing a small child. My sensei, as you know, was Senju Tobirama. The Shodai would come visit my team often, watching us train while talking to sensei. Their conversations were usually the Shodai asking sensei for advice in some or other matter. But there were a few times where the conversations didn't quite make sense. Not at first. Hashirama just finished sorting out a conflict towards Iwa. Izuna and Madara are starting to settle down and look for wives. Even if they haven't realized it yet. Nawaki is in the academy. Tanaka has started his sealing master training. Mito is more than pleased that Kizuna is interested in medical ninjutsu, even at so young an age. All in all, the village is shaping up nicely. Naruto grinned widely while Tobirama watched his young Genin work through katas. He'd spar with them as soon as Naruto left and their katas were essentially warm-ups. Hiruzen knew this, yet he was eager to hear what news the Shodai would bring. To say he idolized the man would be an understatement. And how does this version measure up to the previous one? Tobirama hummed, eyes never leaving his students. He was a careful man, and he didn't much agree with wastefulness. An injury meant wasted time. As a senju that didn't sit well with him. They were far too used to be ready for the battlefield at the drop of a hat. This is happening much faster. I can't say much for the other 4 villages. I'm assuming they'll start forming faster too, but if they end up taking pointers from our village, I don't know. Naruto scratched at forehead. At the very least having the academy sooner means that we've got a solid training system in place and we'll be able to strengthen our forces beyond that of what we had last time. It's likely that there won't be any ninja wars this time. Whether or not that's a good thing remains to be seen. Tobirama hummed, analyzing the pros and cons in his mind before his gaze suddenly sharpened. Hiruzen. You're slacking. The brown-haired Genin jumped, having been focusing more on the conversation than on the kata. He was confused though. The conversation made it seem as though they'd tried to unite the clans before and hadn't been successful. Surely he'd have heard about that? It wasn't only with Tobirama-sensei that these sorts of strange conversations were had. Hiruzen paused thoughtfully. Being the student of someone as important as Senju Tobirama meant that a lot of important shinobi wanted his attention. I was privy to many conversations I supposed I shouldn't have been. Uchiha Madara, Uchiha Izuna, Uzumaki Mito, Uzumaki Asuna, Senju Hashirama, and many, many others. Yet it was only with the founding 5 that these strange conversations happened. I didn't think much of them at first and honestly I didn't remember them either. You'd be surprised at what your brain picks up on. But we'll get back to that. What more could Hiruzen have to say? I remember being taught the Rasengan, arguably a jutsu that was hardly my style. When the Shodai taught it to me I was in awe of being trusted with such a powerful technique. Looking back at that memory now, I realized that he had an agenda in mind. I looked at my students when the day came to pass on the technique and I remembered quite vividly what Naruto-sama wanted. The jutsu was only to be passed down to the most unruly of my students. There was no doubt that could only mean Jiraiya. I must admit, there was a brief moment where I considered passing the jutsu to Orochimaru-kun. Yet the Shodai's words seemed to ring true when he said it only really worked for boisterous shinobi. Jiraiya was able to learn the technique after many months. Perhaps even a year or 2. He tried his best to add his own signature to it, but alas, that task proved more difficult than what Jiraiya could complete. As far as I know, he's still trying. We knew that the Shodai was able to add elements to his Rasengan, yet Jiraiya had trouble with it. He eventually passed the technique to Minato-kun. He wasn't the most boisterous student, but he begged Jiraiya something fierce to be taught the technique. He has managed to come close to matching the Shodai with his mastery of the Rasengan. Still, his version of the Rasengan lacks something. Hiruzen paused to scratch at his chin. Naruto, despite the stakes, was enjoying the stories. It gave him the insight he'd been craving all this time. The day Hashirama-sama returned to the village with news of the Shodai's death, the entire village seemed to lose its light. It took a long time to regain the former happiness and peace that had crept into our hearts upon arriving in Konoha. Hashirama was not to be outdone, and in many ways he was a better Hokage. But the same could be said of the Sandaime, Tobirama-sensei. Hiruzen smiled. Each person who's worn the hat has managed to do better than the last in some way. Yet, it's important to note Uchiha Madara's reaction to the Shodai's death. There was an unsettled feeling in the way the remaining founding four interacted with each other after Naruto-sama's passing. It was troubling, but there was nothing I could have done at the time. Madara was perhaps the most obvious about his discontent. Tobirama, where is your blasted brother? Madara appeared angry, frustrated and hardly in the mood for small talk. The addressed Senju paused in his instructions to look towards the Uchiha. He remained calm, apparently used to the Uchiha's outbursts. You know as much as I do, Madara, and you know that. Don't tell me you actually believe his story? Madara's words seemed ripped from his very core, as though he'd spat them out before he could change his mind. Is this what troubles you? Tobirama hummed, walking away from Dansu, perhaps the one change Naruto had implemented in Hiruzen's teammates. The rivalry would be better as teammates, perhaps preventing Dansu's dark future. Tobirama placed his hands on his hips as he considered Madara's question. You've always had a healthy suspicious nature. After all, you did see something in your father's death that most chose to ignore. Yet Madara wasn't happy with Tobirama's response. Well? What do you think of things? I haven't been able to talk to your brother in weeks. I've scarcely been able to find him. Personally, what can we do? If you're right, and Hashirama sent Naruto back to his true time, what do we do about it? Tobirama sighed, removing his hands from his waist to wave a hand in the air. We can stop him from becoming the next Hokage. You can have that position for all I care. How do I trust someone who didn't trust us with a decision so important, so far-reaching? He must have asked Mito for help. He's a fool at sealing and you know it. Another decision that wasn't his alone to make. Madara had begun to pace, throwing his hands into the air before glaring at Tobirama as though daring him to disagree. Careful, Uchiha, you're dangerously close to insubordination. Tobirama's voice was low, a warning. You're a fool when it comes to your brother, Senju, and one day it'll be the end of you. Madara narrowed his gaze before walking away. That was the last time Madara was in the village. He left after that. I don't know if he spoke to Hashirama. Or if he confirmed his suspicions. I didn't understand his suspicions at the time. He left, leaving behind Uchiha Izuna, his beloved younger brother. Strangely, the Uchiha clan didn't seem bothered by his departure. Hashirama didn't even go after him. In fact, it was hardly spoken about. Even stranger, was that Uchiha Madara was never heard from again. The remaining three founders never spoke of Uchiha Madara's departure, nor of the Shodai's untimely departure. It seemed to be a sore topic and so naturally it was avoided. It was only much later, when I was given the Yondaime Hokage position and I gained access to new information, that all these little oddities started coming back to me. I gained access to the Shodai's origin files, something that was strangely not taught in the academy. I learned about how he was from a distant village, with a mother and a father who had sacrificed themselves for the village. I also knew that no such village existed at the time. The Sarutobi clan had an astute sense of history. We are excellent record keepers. Other reports and files began to highlight certain recurring facts. In the shinobi world, especially the world of a sealing master, many things that seem impossible, suddenly become all too doable, wouldn't you say, Naruto-kun? Naruto considered the man silently for a moment. He wasn't known as the professor for nothing. Now whether or not he was still known as the professor in this time period didn't take away his potential to be the professor. He had pieced together the information from careless random tidbits of information that the founding five hadn't thought to hide or protect. It would be a great disservice to the Yondaime to deny his carefully pieced together and wholly accurate guess, if his guess was what Hiruzen implied it was. He might not have all the details, yet how could he have gotten those details unless one of the other four told them to him? It would be up to Naruto to tell him the whole story. If he chose to do so, Hiruzen still might have more to tell him. Well, I'm still not sure what this all has to do with me. Interesting as these stories have been, Naruto began when a slight knock interrupted him. Yes, Asuma-kun. Hiruzen called. The younger Sarutobi entered with a slight bow of apology at his interruption. The Anbu are here. They wish to take Naruto-kun home. Naruto pouted. Had they left him for a while to enjoy his visit, or had they taken this long to find him? Another time then, Naruto-kun. Hiruzen smiled, winking at him. Was the wink a way of saying his secret, although unconfirmed for now, was safe with the older Sarutobi? Naruto sighed and stood, bowing to the older Sarutobi before walking out of the room with Asuma. This protection detail was getting rather annoying. So, how is Konomaru doing? Naruto asked, directing his attention towards Asuma, who shrugged. Better now, I guess. Still going to need to practice though. He's got the potential to surpass even you, Asuma-san. Naruto chuckled, which prompted Asuma to laugh as well. He's got to learn how to hit the post first. As soon as they exited the compound, an all-encompassing chill gripped at Naruto's very chakra core. All he could manage was to grip the material of the jacket by his heart. By the look on Asuma's face, he could only assume the Sarutobi felt it as well. All over Konoha, shinobi and citizens alike stood frozen in their tasks. Minato was instantly alert, mind wondering if this was an invasion of some sort. He could barely raise a hand to signal the Anbu, who were no doubt having trouble obeying the summons. This was disturbing. Konoha was supposed to be without equal when it came to village defenses. What was this? It was almost like the most concentrated killing intent he'd ever had the displeasure of feeling. Before he could do much more than summon his Anbu, a deep, calm voice thundered in their minds. I am Uchiha Madara, and I will not be ignored. Before this day is done, you will hand Namikaze Naruto over to the Uchiha clan compound. If you do not, then I declare war on Konohagakure. May the gods be merciful to those who defy me. Naruto gasped for air the moment the iciness ebbed out of his system. Using the village sealing matrix in such a manner. It was unthinkable. What was that baka thinking? Never mind that, war? Naruto knew he had mere seconds to act. 2 seconds after this realization, Namikaze Minato himself stood in front of Naruto. His face was grim as he gripped Naruto's shoulder. We're not handing you over, Naruto-kun, he stated before they were suddenly standing in what Naruto could only assume was a safe house. Stay here. I'm going to get your mother. The words had hardly left his mouth before Minato was gone again. Naruto only had time to look around the room, taking note of the bareness, and the seals built into its foundations. This wasn't a safe house. This was a prison. Did Minato intend to lock him in here for his own safety? His father and mother returned before he could look around the room much more, and Kushina immediately hugged him. Menma was still out on his mission. To-chan, I don't understand, what does Uchiha Madara want with me? Naruto asked, playing dumb. I don't know, Naruto, but more importantly, how do we know that really is Madara we're dealing with? Minato huffed in frustration, pacing as his thoughts raced. I can't stay here for long, and neither can your mother. We need to be in the village, organizing the clans. If this man is serious, if he truly intends to fight us, then we'll need to be ready. You can't leave me here? Naruto blinked in confusion. He could help in the war. No. You're staying here. For whatever reason, they want you. Kushina pulled away from the hug, her eyes firm as she spoke. There was no arguing this one. But, I can't just sit here while everyone else fights a war over me, Naruto stammered. It's unheard of. One person against a whole village. They'll ask you to retire over this. Naruto looked to his father. If things end badly, then perhaps, Minato agreed. However, I don't intend for things to go that badly. We are Konoha, Naruto. We will make it through this. His tone had softened. And what if this is really Madara? He's one of us, a founder no less. We shouldn't fight him. Naruto was pleading now. A war over him? Ridiculous. Yet, the tailed beasts were that valuable, and Madara knew it. A declaration of war doesn't sound like he feels the same way. Kushina's tone was sympathetic, more for Naruto than Madara. Naruto grit his teeth. His parents weren't going to be swayed. What if I choose to go to him? Naruto spat, I'm old enough that it should be my choice too. Kushina sighed as Naruto spoke, her chakra building up. Naruto-kun, I'm sorry, she whispered, interrupting Naruto's words. Naruto realized too late, jerking backwards and away from her grasp but not in time. The seal stuck and he hit the ground, fast asleep. Minato picked him up and placed him on the bed. You're sure he won't be able to leave? Kushina asked and Minato nodded. Not unless he's a sealing master. You know we never did find out the extent of his sealing knowledge. Kushina sounded unsure. At the very least, by the time that sleeping seal wears off it'll be too late. Why do you think Madara wants him? Minato was entirely frustrated with recent events. He's got a peculiar chakra. Mito-sama has likened it to that of the Shodais. There were many seals that the Shodai created which only he could open or control. Perhaps that's what Madara wants. His motives were unclear, his objective all too transparent. The only problem Minato had now was why had he bothered with the announcement in the first place? Why hadn't he just snuck into the village and kidnapped Naruto that way? Minato had no doubt in his mind that the man could have. Had it really been Madara? Let's go prepare for a war, Minato stated grimly, giving his son one final look before disappearing from the room. 0.0.0. When the next morning came, the village was deathly quiet. Somewhere during the night, every single Uchiha had vanished from the Uchiha clan compound. There weren't signs of a struggle, and they hadn't left through the village gates. They were merely gone. Minato clenched his teeth in anger. Did this mean they had joined this so-called Madara? Or had they been taken by force? Were they still alive? Many of the clan heads had argued the pros of handing Naruto over to this maniac. They'd even had the audacity to point out Naruto's many failures, comparing him to Menma, who by comparison was an invaluable asset. Some had blatantly implied that Minato should be glad to be rid of such a failure. He was staring at the clan heads now, still trying to come to some sort of agreement. In the end, a debate wasn't needed. Minato had simply wanted to hear the opinions of those he intended to fight with. It had been a long night. One where he hadn't missed the absence of Fugaku. Upon sending an envoy to fetch the man, the returning report detailing the missing clan had been hair-raising. Enough. I will not hear one more word of sending my son to the slaughter. Kushina growled, banging a fist on the table. Anyone here who wishes to send my son to that bastard best be willing to send one of their own children as well, or so help me I'll take them from you myself. See how you like it. Kushina. Minato's tone was soft, a warning and a comfort. Yet Kushina's words had an effect, a loud one at that. Many of the more vocal clan members were suddenly shifting in their seats, unable to meet the red-haired Kunoichi's gaze. Strategically speaking, sending the boy over to the enemy wouldn't be in our best interests. Nara Shikaku stated, using the lull in conversation to his advantage. We know that they've previously tried to capture the boy. We know he's valuable to them, even if we don't know why. It's safe to assume that keeping Naruto here gives us the advantage. It also means the war won't start off with drastic measures, simply because if we're hiding the boy then they can't be wanton in their destruction of the village. It puts a cap on their efforts. You make a sound argument as always, Nara-san. Minato inclined his head to the other shinobi, who inclined his own in acknowledgement. Is there anyone here who disagrees with Nara-san? They were greeted with stony silence. Shikaku's logic and Kushina's threat keeping all arguments silent for now. At this moment in time we do not know how long we have before this so-called Madara person in on our doorstep. Minato's response was interrupted by the same icy feeling from before. It was gripping, all-consuming. It told them all hope was lost, that they shouldn't even try to fight against it. A swirl of blue chakra rotated in the center of the room. Slowly, an image began to form, two figures, hazy and crude. Now Namikaze, I do respect you, but if you insist on carrying on like that we're going to have to get personal. The voice was the same as before, only now it took on a chiding edge to it. Kushina choked on a scream as the chakra image snapped into clarity so suddenly it was hard to comprehend. I'm afraid you've not met my deadline, Madara continued. His arm was stretched towards his right, a kunai pressed against Menma's throat. Menma, who looked as though he'd been beaten repeatedly. The boy could barely stand, one eye swollen shut as blood ran free from several gashes and cuts. I must commend you, Namikaze. The boy is annoyingly loyal. He, unfortunately, cannot give me what I want. It has to be Naruto-kun. You bastard. I'll kill you. Minato could only manage a hoarse whisper. His statement was met with cruel laughter. Kill me? You don't even know how to find me. My, it's been so long since I've had such a good laugh. I think I'll keep this one. A little longer and he'll break. They all do. Different times we've grown up in, little Namikaze. Can you successfully lead a war? Minato watched helplessly as the kunai was dragged to Menma's face, sharp edge digging into his cheek. The only sign of pain Menma gave was a sharp intake of breath. I was bred for war, but you've been living so peacefully, confident in your village's protection. I have a secret for you, little Namikaze. I own those seals. I can manipulate them how and when I choose. There's only one other person in your entire village who can do that, and you've tossed him aside, chosen to brand him a failure. You don't deserve your son, little Namikaze. Madara, you've gone too far. The quiet voice was one that Madara had not heard in many years. I can't believe you've managed to cling to your wretched life for so long, Mito, Madara sneered. You and I both know why I want the boy. Just give him to me. The kunai was removed from Menma's face and he collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. Madara kicked Menma's side, forcing the boy to fall to the ground. He placed a foot on Menma's back. Wasn't this one a prodigy? Madara's tone had grown thoughtful, continuing as though Mito hadn't interrupted when it appeared Mito wasn't going to reply. I'll trade this one for Naruto. A prodigy for a failure. I think that's more than fair. What do you want with my son? Kushina had managed to fight off the chilling hopelessness enough to approach the chakra figures, her eyes on Menma. Why, little Kushina-chan, what I want is very simple. You see, I want to kill him, Madara stated so sweetly it was as though he was offering Kushina a slice of cake, waving the kunai about with a warm smile. He pressed his foot down, Menma yelling out in pain for the first time since appearing. How many times had he tried to call for Minato only to get no response? How many times had he cried out for his voice to sound so broken? How many hours had he been subjected to Madara's torture? Minato tried to sense out the mark he had left on Menma's shirt, but there was no signal responding. Had Madara removed it? Were they somewhere too far away? Was something blocking it? You have 1 week until the war begins. Graceful, aren't I? Until then, I'll keep playing with this one. Madara smiled, before dropping the kunai from high enough for it to bury itself in Menma's back, whose hoarse cry of pain ranging their ears long after the image disappeared from view. Chapter 26. Minato's furious command was the first to break Madara's spell. We need to find a way to lock him out of the seal matrix, now. His stony gaze was on his wife and the aged Uzumaki clan head as he clenched his hands tightly, desperate to hit an enemy he could not reach. Mito nodded once, but her eyes were grim. I'll be honest with you, Hokage-sama, the Shodai seal matrix is one we've yet to crack. The most anyone has been able to do is create a pocket outside of the seal matrix. What concerns me more is Madara's age. Did you not notice how young he looked? Mito had a good point, who also looked as though a small breeze would blow her away, and who was technically younger than Madara. Madara looked fresh in his prime. Barely older than Kakashi. Minato took a moment to analyze that fact. Senju Tsunade was known to use jutsus to create an illusion of her age. Was Madara doing the same? The man's movements suggested that no, he wasn't. A jutsu might affect one's appearance but wouldn't affect one's body. The age would have shown in his handling of Menma. Menma. Minato's heart squeezed, but without a location there was precious little he could do. Kakashi. Minato called, unsure of who else to call as he would have preferred Itachi. Would Jiraiya-sensei be able to help? Would he work well with Kakashi? Jiraiya was very flashy, Kakashi preferring to stick to the shadows. Yet Jiraiya's ability to gather information was unmatched. So one more then, but who? Haruto? Too important for the seal matrix. Arashi? Too young, yet he had the advantage of being Kakashi's student. Someone skilled at information gathering. Hyuga, Neji Hyuga. Young as well but talented. Haku? Also young and talented. Which would ensure a successful mission? The decision was difficult. He'd leave it to Kakashi. He'd know best who he'd need to work with. Hi, Hokage-sama. Kakashi had been in the meeting, mostly keeping silent. You need to find Menma, go to his last known location and try to see where he went. Take whoever you need. Just leave the initial report on my desk. Minato was quiet, keeping it to just them. The rest of the meeting room was busy discussing amongst themselves, in hushed harried tones, a clear unease gripping the room's occupants. I want Naruto, Kakashi said firmly. Minato gave him a sour look. It was a dangerous request. He's a really good sensor. He might be able to track Menma on that alone. Kakashi argued. Madara won't expect it. If we pretend Naruto is still in the village, then it gives us the surprise element. It won't work that way. Madara has access to the seal matrix. Which means that he can sense everyone in the village. Those bubbles outside of the seal matrix might be our best hope at hiding Naruto from Madara. But that will be no different than him leaving the village completely. As always, Hokage-sama, the decision is yours. I can only add my own thoughts. Shikaku had approached, and had been eavesdropping. We should ignore Menma for now. I know he's your son, and you desperately want him back, but have you considered he's a distraction? I suggest we investigate the Uchiha compound. Why did Madara want Naruto to go there, and where did the Uchiha go? If the clan has joined Madara, it's something we'd need to know, given that fighting against the Uchiha requires specific countermeasures. Ignore Menma? Minato's lips thinned as he pressed them together in displeasure. Shikaku's logic was sound, as always. Kakashi, you're on Menma. Find Jiraiya and get him to investigate the Uchiha compound. He can take Uzumaki Arashi with him. There might be seals involved. Alone? Kakashi asked, referring to his mission. Yes, alone. We need our forces here. A week barely gives me enough time to recall the shinobi out on missions, Minato sighed, squeezing the bridge of his nose. Shikaku, you're on the war council. We have a lot of work set out for us. Kakashi bowed slightly before shunshining from the room. Being on Menma hardly told him if he was meant to find the teen, or rescue the teen. Still, finding him meant finding Madara, and that meant they at least had one advantage. Minato's decision wasn't a purely selfish one. 0.0.0. Naruto watched from the rafters of the meeting room. He'd seen and felt everything Madara had been saying. Yet there was a detachment to his chakra, a detachment that meant his words didn't match his feelings. Why go to all this trouble to get Naruto only to kill him? It was time to get to the bottom of things. In the 2 seconds before Minato's arrival, he'd managed to create a shadow clone. One with the variation of not being so disposable. That clone was now stuck in the prison safe house under Kushina's sleeping seal. The original Naruto was free to research and train for the next week to his heart's content, only using a simple henge seal to ensure that he looked like a perfectly average shinobi. Mostly because now that Minato and Kushina believed him to be locked away, he'd been able to roam freely with little to no resistance, and definitely without worrying about a squad of Onbu following him around. Disappearing from the room, he focused his reappearance on the Uchiha compound. He wanted to have a look around before Jiraiya did. Taking a deep breath, and holding it, he pulled in as much concentrated senjutsu as he could manage before directing it all to his eyes. He wanted to see the seals in the compound without having to activate them with chakra. If Mito and Kushina were focusing on the seal matrix, then they'd see his chakra if he activated it so blatantly. The pain in his eyes was different from the trials. This time it was more of a dull throb. When he opened them, he immediately recognized the difference. He'd done something right this time. He could see the seals as he had been able to do so before. With a grin, he looked around the immediate entrance of the compound, noting nothing different to the seal matrix he'd implemented upon creation. Walking further in, and still nothing new. Not even little day-to-day ones, such as child safety seals when starting a new family. The Uchiha had apparently trusted in his original design. But, with the Uchiha gone, that meant he was free to go to Itachi's room without worry. Shunshining straight to the entrance of Sasuke's house, he didn't bother taking off his shoes as he walked towards the closed door of Itachi's room. His sensing ability picked up a large amount of residual chakra moving in this direction. Had he been right about Itachi's suspicious behavior from the start? The seals in the clan head's house were mostly intact. All except the area around Itachi's room. If he had to say, it appeared as though the room itself had been ripped out of the seal matrix, leaving a gaping hole of vulnerability in the village defenses. How careless. Well, if anyone was stupid enough to break into the village through the Uchiha clan head's house, then they deserved whatever they had coming to them. Still. With a tsk of annoyance, he pulled open the door, taking note of the less than immaculate appearance. There had been traffic through this room, and a whole lot of it. This was where the Uchiha had gone. Looking to the opposite wall, he saw the seal that Madara or even Itachi had been trying to hide in removing the room from the matrix. A teleportation door. Once opened, anyone who'd step through would come out wherever the other door was. They could be halfway across the elemental nations for all he knew. Even saying they were realistically a week away was ridiculous. If they had the ability to create a seal such as this one, then they had the ability to create another doorway to get back to Konoha. Were they planning a surprise attack by coming back through this very door? Naruto's gaze narrowed in frustration. Given Madara's emotions during his little speech, even Menma's, there was more to this story than what they were telling. Menma hadn't been scared at all. In fact, he'd been highly focused, perhaps on acting out his part of the play. What was the end game? Who was the real enemy? This whole business of thinking was not his favorite area of shinobi expertise. This was where Tobirama and Izuna had shown. Hell, even Madara. Approaching the sealed doorway, he tried to put some senjutsu into it, to activate it. If he didn't have answers, he could try finding Madara and asking the man directly. The seal, however, required a specific sequence of hand seals to open, and apparently someone in the Uchiha clan had taken it upon themselves to learn sealing because this style meant he couldn't see what the combination of hand signs were without a Sharingan. So it appeared he wasn't going to find Madara using the doorway. If the man wanted Naruto, he was sure making it hard to find him. Alternatively, Naruto could just leave the village. Go find the man the hard way. Yet, there was still something in Konoha that needed his protection. He was going to have to stay close by. Pulling out a pot of sealing ink, he charged it with senjutsu before throwing it against the transportation seal, effectively melting its foundations. They wouldn't be able to come back this way, if that had even been their plan at all. Leaving the Uchiha compound, as he was sure Jiraiya would be there soon enough, he decided that perhaps it was time to finish that conversation with Sarutobi Hiruzen. Kami knew he needed the ally. 0.0.0.0 You asked me why I hadn't told my father who I really was? Hiruzen had just returned to the compound after Minato had adjourned the meeting so that they could all get some needed rest. It would be a while before they could have more of it. He jumped at the voice turning towards the shadowy corner he just passed. Your office? An unassuming shinobi asked with a raised brow. Unassuming to most, Hiruzen knew exactly who this man was. He nodded and moved to the room from yesterday. When he arrived, Naruto was waiting for him. Had enough of playing games? Hiruzen asked. I wasn't playing. I was merely seeing how much you knew. Naruto replied, heading into his older form, his voice deeper and more commanding as well. Sit, Hiruzen. It's going to be a long conversation. I suggest your eldest son tends to the clan duties in your absence. Naruto waved a hand towards the seat across from him while a shadow clone formed without command. The clone hinged into a copy of Hiruzen, who then left the room to go deliver the message that he'd be taking a longer break than expected. Old bones and all that. Taking the liberties, are we? Hiruzen raised a brow at the clone but sat nevertheless, grateful to be saved the trouble. Firstly, Naruto began, ignoring Hiruzen's comment. I don't know if my arrival is coincidental to recent events timing, or if it was instrumental. Why now of all times? He had been an easier target when he was younger. Secondly, I said nothing because I was enjoying the quiet. Being Hokage was demanding in ways I could never have expected, especially to a village as new as Konoha had been. Ah yes, the paperwork is rather tedious. Hiruzen inclined his head in agreement. No, it wasn't that. Naruto sighed and looked down, trying to find the right words to express what he meant. I was sought after every minute of the day. Training advice, team formations, jutsu mastery, mission rates, clan disputes, all of it, every waking moment. I barely had time to think. At the time I hadn't realized how much it was exhausting me. When I got back here, however, it all crashed down around me. The peace I suddenly had was nice. Naruto looked distant, smiling softly at some or other memory. It was also hard to really comprehend my reality. I was taking a moment to let it sink in that I was never going home. It wasn't all that hard. Hashirama's seal had been quite well designed. Seal? Hiruzen interrupted in confusion. Hi, as you correctly guessed, I was from another time. This time, to be precise, it was an accident, one we later learned was due to Hashirama's past actions. Actions he hadn't committed in your past, but in mine. Confusing, I know, but somehow, the guilt he felt at having pulled me from my true present and into the past never left him. If anything, it seemed to grow and it consumed him to the point where he felt that he needed to send me back, Naruto explained sadly. His actions only became clearer to me when I had a moment to think about them. That mission where I had intentionally gotten myself stuck in that time seal trap. I had a lot of time to think things through. I realized that Hashirama felt like he owed it to me to send me back here. You're not upset? Hiruzen asked, a picture of Naruto's life forming in his mind. How old were you when you got sent to the past? 16, same age as now really. I am upset with him, and at the same time I'm not. There is the part of me that never knew him, The part that grew up here. That part doesn't know nor understand why I should even care. The Shodai part of me, however, Naruto's voice trailed off. It's pointless to be angry though. I knew that immediately upon arrival. Going back was out of the question. I had no idea where I'd end up, who would know me and who wouldn't. But you'd built a whole life in the past? There was Haruto-kun as well. You know about him, don't you? Hiruzen's picture was becoming bleaker the more Naruto spoke. Hi, I know about him now, but I didn't then. The first time I met him was at the trials. There was anger, there was sadness, and there was so much more. Yet, what would I have said to him? He's older than I've ever been. I couldn't be a father to him now even if I wanted to be. He's lived a lifetime without knowing me. Imagine a gaki like me approaching you and trying to get involved. It would be hard, and more pain than I wanted to feel at that point in time. The Uzumaki need time, Hiruzen, you know that? Naruto was crying, silent tears streaming down his cheeks, the emotions he'd felt towards his son finally surfacing. He'd been so used to bottling his emotions due to the Uzumaki sensing, that he hadn't realized just how deeply he'd felt until he was addressing the topic directly. It wasn't a loud cry, and it wasn't a passionate cry, it was soft, and silent, an ache of the heart that would never go away. Hiruzen wanted to move towards him, but what comfort could he offer the man now? His response was extraordinarily mature, a response better suited to a man much older than Naruto was. Hiruzen knew that it took a lot for the man to physically hold himself back from family. Uzumaki Naruto was fiercely loyal, especially when it came to close family. Anyways, Naruto continued, wiping the tears from his cheeks as though bringing himself into check once again. I'd been here for a week before I realized something was wrong. The trials, for one, was a massive indicator. They appeared to be more of a screening process. Perhaps it was Mito, now that I know she's still alive, looking to see where I'd pop up. Testing the young ones to see if there was some change and I'd come back as a different person completely. Time travel is untested and therefore unpredictable. She must have wanted to be sure. And then there was the breaking of the sealing wonders. Hiruzen hummed. Still, why didn't you approach your father after your realization? Well, you see, there was a nagging suspicion in my mind that I needed to lay low for a while, a sensation I couldn't explain it, and the understanding that the minute I made my presence known, things would have changed. I'd have to prove it for one, and I'd have had to explain it for another. I was utterly content for this world to never know the truth of my origins. It would have been easier for me and for them. I can think of many negatives to a village coming together because of time travel. The least important one being existential crisis formed from the sudden question of, what would I have been if not for Uzumaki Naruto? Usually the answer would have been, he's dead, but you know, most people won't believe that. Hiruzen was surprised at Naruto's foresight. He was entirely correct in his assumption that a time travel revelation could potentially cause more harm than good. The only good you could see it coming forward was regaining your previous standing in society, the respect and awe that come with that standing. As well as the pestering, Naruto deadpanned. I wanted the anonymity to conduct some investigations, but then the trials happened and I was under constant surveillance from Menma, in particular, was highly suspicious of me. It was either wait it out or come forward. I chose the former. Naruto scratched at the back of his neck in thought. I don't know what his connection to Madara is, but I suspect Menma isn't as much of a fool in sealing as he would like to appear to be. Madara would have needed a sealing master to break those sealing wonders. You suspect your brother to be a traitor? Hiruzen rose a brow. He'd forgotten just how brilliant Uzumaki Naruto's sensing was, and the deductions he could make because of it. Naruto shook his head. It's more complicated than merely traitor, you see, I don't know who the real villain is. Hiruzen had no idea what Naruto meant. It was plain to him and everyone else in Konoha that the man who'd declared war on them was the enemy. Yet, Naruto was hesitating. Was it because he held Madara in the opinion of a close friend? Were his emotions getting in the way of things? Madara was never declared a traitor by his clan. Not like before, Naruto muttered, and their disappearance points to them having joined him. They must believe in his cause, whatever it might be, even Itachi. Madara was a traitor before? Hiruzen was even more concerned that Naruto was too close to this. After all, if Madara's previous path in life had been that of a village traitor, it was even more likely that he was the villain this time as well. Naruto ignored him, closing his eyes to think things through. Hiruzen was too close to the village to see things openly. He sensed that from the man's chakra, but Naruto was too close to the village and Madara to see things entirely objectively. All the people he could have asked for advice weren't in the village, such as Itachi, or they were too close to the problem, such as Haruto. Why is it that I never knew Mito was alive? Naruto asked suddenly. Well, she is quite elderly, most of her Uzumaki clan head duties were deferred. This is the first time she's been seen in many years. Most assumed she'd passed quietly in her sleep one night and no official announcement had been made. Hiruzen replied, looking somewhat sheepish. The problem is, she shouldn't be alive. Naruto's tone showed he was dead serious despite his callous assessment. Neither Madara nor Mito should be alive. Hiruzen was silent as he considered Naruto's words. The Uzumaki wasn't known for being wildly inaccurate in his assessments. Yet, this all felt as though he was being too emotional. Naruto picked up on Hiruzen's response. He wasn't going to be of much use. Naruto needed a full, unbiased picture, and Hiruzen was too biased one way. I have to go. If I stay here too long it'll get suspicious. That and you're needed in the war council. I trust that you'll continue to keep my secret, and if you choose to tell my father, just remember this, the information is still protected under a SSS class ranking and I am still the Shodai. Naruto's tone brooked no arguments, and perhaps made no friends either. You can't do this alone, you have tell him so he can help you. Hiruzen was used to bull-headed shinobi. No, this is my problem. From my past. I won't let those of the present pay for my inability to confront this problem when I should have. If I'd handled things differently, Hashirama wouldn't have sent me to the past, which would in turn affect Madara's presence here now. Perhaps even Mito's as well. Maybe, she's been waiting all the time for me to reappear. Naruto grit his teeth, thinking of the day he'd shown Hashirama his paintings and of the look the Senju had on his face. That guilt was something Naruto should have addressed and handled more firmly than what he had. He could hardly imagine Hashirama would have resorted to such drastic measures. Yes, this is all my fault and I will be the one to fix things. After all, I'm the only one that can give Madara what he wanted. I refuse to see people die needlessly, trying to fight him. You and I both know he could burn this village to the ground without even trying. The only question I have for him now, is why hasn't he? Imagine sending Sakura up against that mountain, or even Uzumaki. Hell, anyone from this time, including someone as capable as Kakashi or even his father. It was hardly fair. Madara was a beast. So no, there was no way in all of the elemental nations, he was going to allow those of this time to face a monster of the past. Before Hiruzen could reply, Naruto had disappeared, his unassuming henge back in place. 0.0.0.0. His choices now were to go to the Uzumaki compound, where he could potentially blow his cover due to the sensing abilities of those in the clan. Or he could go to the Seal Matrix, tweak it so that no one could disrupt it, Mito or Madara, or he could go to the Toads and spend time training. A week, however, was not going to be enough. Stopping Madara meant fighting him first, he knew that. So training was definitely needed, and a plan. There was something more going on, more than Mito and more than Madara. Neither of the two would have done this without provocation. Problem was, who was doing the provoking? He was going to have to let this war happen, just to see who this third party was. They were incredibly good at hiding. He closed his eyes as he focused his chakra and his mind, before disappearing from Konoha entirely and reappearing in Mount Myaboku. He had a special connection to this world, hence he was able to transport to it. However, that connection was one way only. He wasn't going to be able to transport back to Konoha. He'd have to travel there the long way. The Toads around him were not surprised by his arrival, no doubt Gamamaru having foreseen it. I hope you are ready for the consequences of your actions, shinobi of the future, for you will face them. I will not give you the words of my prophecy as I have done for those before you and those who will come after you, but I will give you the blessing of a contract with the Toads of Mount Myaboku once more, Gamamaru stated warningly. Step forward, shinobi, and take your place in history as the first Toad summoner. A place you will do well to remember, that was never meant to be yours. The words that Gamamaru had spoken to him so long ago rang through his mind, as he approached the hall Gamamaru sat in, knowing its position well. He considered the greatly aged Toad, and the silence that had greeted his arrival. Was this what you meant? He addressed the elder Toad, features grim. Not even a proper greeting, Naruto boy? Fukasaku chided and Naruto tisked in impatience. Now Fukasaku, Naruto-kun is an old friend. One who is dealing with many problems. Gamamaru stated slowly. That's no excuse for poor manners. Shima huffed, in agreement with her husband. Be that as it may, Gamamaru slowly raised a hand to wave the issue away. Yes, Naruto-kun, this is what I foresaw. A great conflict brought about by your actions. However, it is worth noting that you yourself came from a time of impending great conflict. It is important in this time to remember that your actions also brought about a great deal of good. This will be the first war the shinobi nations will face, rather than their third or fourth, Fukasaku offered. Naruto looked down as he considered the words offered to him. If I may, I wish to stay here and train until the war begins. Naruto knew that dwelling on the what-ifs and the if only weren't going to solve his problem. Therefore he needed to act, and that meant training, for now. You would be better served going to your own dimension. The one you created many years ago in order to trap the Senju and the Uchiha clan heads. This will allow you the sufficient time you'll need in order to be ready. Gamamaru replied, take as many of my children as you need, and treat them well. I, however, am going to sleep. I've waited long enough for your arrival. Ah, there was the old toad Naruto remembered. At least this time the toad could remember his name. Naruto bowed with a smile. He'd spend his first day here, testing the toads for the right sparring partners, and then he'd do as the great toad had suggested. It was an incredibly good suggestion after all. He could manipulate time in that dimension so as to have all the time he needed in order to be ready. 0.0.0.0 1 week later, saw Namikaze Naruto breaking out of his safe house prison. He'd had to wait until everyone had marched off to meet Madara and the now confirmed Uchiha forces. One clan against a whole village. Even for the Uchiha it was considered utter madness. He'd broken out only once before, after receiving a note from the original to stop the others from changing the seal matrix. It hadn't been difficult. All he'd had to do was wait for everyone to leave the seal matrix control room, even if it was only for a moment, and then lock it from the inside so that no one but himself was able to unlock it. His father had been so distracted by the war preparations, he didn't even notice that the safe house seals had been tampered with. It was somewhat distressing, to be honest. Yet, Madara was a large threat to be dealing with. Naruto didn't blame the man for being so preoccupied with the details. Kakashi had returned with little to no news of Menma's whereabouts, as Jiraiya had only been able to conclude that the Uchiha had managed to leave with the use of seals. With Naruto's obvious advantage of being able to see inactive seals, it was almost cheating when he went to investigate the compound. Jiraiya just wasn't in his league. However, Jiraiya had managed to learn the position of the Uchiha clan. Exactly 2 days' march away from Konoha. So blatantly obvious it was almost taunting them. The only exception had been Madara's and Menma's position. They hadn't been with the rest of the clan. Upon learning of the Uchiha's position, Minato immediately approached them, only to be met with warning fireballs. It was safe to say that the Uchiha had left willingly and weren't in the mood to negotiate a return. With all this, Naruto had been forced to learn through careful sensing that Kushina had returned only once, to remove the sleeping seal so that he could eat and continue with his normal bodily functions. Ka-chan, Naruto began, the moment he'd regained his senses, but she disappeared before he could say a word. Now the day of the war was here. Would it be a war or would it be a slaughter? Madara was confident enough in the Uchiha clan's abilities that he felt they were able to take on the entirety of Konoha. Did he have a trick up his sleeve? Making sure he had all of his equipment, Naruto hurried over to the Uzumaki clan compound. There was something he needed before he arrived on the battlefield. Something he'd seen the day he'd gone to give that report to his mother. Hurrying as much as he dared, since the village wasn't technically deserted, as Minato had only taken the best of the best, leaving the majority of the forces behind to defend Konoha. A smart move on Minato's part, for the other great villages might have taken the conflict as an opportunity to attack the village, therefore triggering the first great shinobi war. Perhaps one was inevitable given the current village conflict, though it wouldn't do to invite one sooner though. Besides, Minato was an honorable man, there was no sense in taking all the village forces to deal with one clan. The Uchiha may be a fearsome clan, but at the end of the day, they wouldn't be walking away from this conflict had Minato chosen to overwhelm them in one go. That wasn't to say Konoha would suffer heavy losses. They would have. On second thought, Konoha might not be able to withstand Madara alone. He had Itachi, Sasuke and Shisui with him, as well as Menma too. The Uchiha bastard sure knew how to pick his allies. This was starting to seem less and less of a sure win on either side. Sitting on a wall in the Uzumaki compound, being nothing more than a decoration, was his sword. A special sword he'd spent many months working on. He grabbed it before focusing on the original Naruto. The original opened a portal in the dimension, just big enough to grab the sword. With that taken care of, Naruto dashed towards the village gates. He was going to need to go fast if he wanted to make it there in time. After all, he was aiming to stop a war. Point 0.0.0. A roaring pillar of flame announced Madara's arrival to the battlefield. With him was a barely conscious Menma. The Uchiha bowed their respect, Itachi in the front, bowing the lowest. Madara-sama. The preparations are complete. Good. Let's go see if they'll take me up on my offer. Madara's gaze was on the forces opposite them. Namikaze Minato was sorely underestimating him if that was all he had brought with him to face the Uchiha clan. They had chosen large open grassland as their war ground, somewhere where no one could easily hide. The forces opposite them were no doubt some of the very best Konoha had to offer, and yet they had less than Madara thought they should have if they were truly taking this seriously. There were perhaps 100 to 150 shinobi all cluttered around the various stations that had been hastily erected. The Uchiha clan deserved more opposition. Konoha had certainly prepared, having set up medical tents, a headquarters tent, a weapons tent, a ration station, and various other stations that suggested a readiness Madara knew they didn't feel in their hearts. For example, they didn't have barriers, physical or otherwise, surrounding them. A sneak attack could easily be arranged. Far too easily. Good Kami, they almost deserve the war. Still, making assumptions could very well get him killed. For all he knew, there was a seal door that would bring reinforcements at a moment's notice. Or even a summoning seal. He could hardly assume that what was in front of him was all he was going to get. Madara began a casual stroll towards the opposing side, dragging Menma along by the back of his collar. Itachi walked with them, features as blank as always, serving as a bodyguard that was hardly needed. He was far more intelligent, however. Madara would give him that. The boy was magnificent. A wasted talent in the current Konoha, really. He'd been essential to the plans thus far. The rest of the Uchiha remained at the makeshift camp, on guard and ready for any orders at a moment's notice. Once his presence was noticed, Namikaze Minato and his wife began approaching them as well, the Konoha forces growing uneasy yet remaining on the border of their camp at the orders of the Hokage. This was a meeting to negotiate terms. Every fair war started with one. If they were lucky, then Naruto would be handed over, no fuss, no problems. If they weren't, well, then it was war. Perhaps Minato would offer up a champion, someone who might best an Uchiha champion. Unlikely, but a possible course of action. However, if that were what the Hokage was planning to do, he wouldn't have brought so many forces in the first place. Still, Madara, personally, wouldn't have chosen to bring Kushina with. She was far too hot-headed to negotiate terms somewhat peacefully. If anyone found it strange that Itachi didn't at least try to be more humane towards Menma, they didn't voice it. Itachi and Menma were supposed to be best friends after all, and yet he said nothing as Madara dragged Menma's half-conscious form across the ground. They met halfway, Minato with a glare cold enough for Madara to see exactly why this man was the current Hokage. He met that glare with an indifferent smirk. "I take it you're not going to hand over Uzumaki Naruto?" He'd had his fair share of starting clan wars. This was hardly any different. Yet the stakes were much, much higher. The nervous buzz of anticipation from the Konoha forces only further reminded Madara of their inexperience with war. This was almost too easy. "Like hell I would, you bastard," Kushina growled. "And it's Namikaze. If you're aiming to kill him, at least get his name right." They were far away enough from either side's forces that at the volume they were talking, it wouldn't carry to the waiting shinobi. It would take some considerable volume to even get a significant order across. Madara had opted to employ hand commands, the Uchiha's sharp vision more than capable of seeing it at such a distance. What would the Gaki in front of him do should things go sour, as they no doubt would? "No, I wasn't mistaken. I wanted Uzumaki Naruto, whom you have in your possession." Madara chided, as though talking to a small child. "Namikaze? What say you, or are you going to let your wife do all the talking for you?" No disrespect intended, Uzumaki-san. He wanted to rile her up. He wanted to increase her anger, to test how much control Mito had over her. He jerked Menma's collar, jostling his wounds and causing the boy to groan in pain. He watched the heat in Kushina's eyes grow and the ice in Minato's harden. "I stand with Kushina. I will not hand over my son Namikaze Naruto. If it's Uzumaki Naruto you want, then your year's too late for him." Minato replied tonelessly. Fire and ice. It was a match that should not be, and yet they were a powerful duo. Madara couldn't help but appreciate and admire the lineage Naruto had. When they fell in this coming battle, what burial method would he use? The Konoha method had always felt a little too impersonal. His obligation to Naruto made him lean towards the Uchiha clan burial methods. If only they'd cooperate. Well then, I guess you can give it up, Menma-kun, Madara sighed, letting go of Menma's collar. The boy flickered out of sight before reappearing standing upright and alert, not a scratch on him. Too bad you didn't just give us Naruto, To-san. I imagine you've locked him away somewhere, Menma stated tonelessly. Kushina was too shocked for words, having been completely fooled by his act. Behind them, the Konoha forces rippled with unease. 3-on-2 wasn't fair if what they were seeing meant Menma was a traitor. Would Madara take advantage of the opening the deception caused, attack their Hokage who would no doubt be emotionally affected by such a revelation? Madara's gaze lingered on the silver-haired Jonin Naruto had always spoken so fondly of. He seemed to be taking charge, keeping the forces in line. He wasn't a fool. He knew the initial negotiations were important, not that they were changing anything. Still, the Jonin was an interesting one. He also seemed to understand that anyone foolish enough to charge in was a dead shinobi. If he were the one to charge in, how long would he last? Perhaps, out of respect for Naruto, he'd spare the man. Make him a war prisoner. What is the meaning of this, Menma? Minato, on the other hand, was more than furious, a stark contrast to Menma and Madara's cool indifference. His body language spoke of a tenseness born of discipline, of holding himself back. He too took note of the opponent's forces, their calm orderliness. They'd very likely been planning this for years. Rashness would get them nowhere. This? I believe this is what one might call a form of emancipation. Menma looked thoroughly disinterested. It was a ruse meant to play on your favoritism. I guess I underestimated your attachment to Naruto. My bad. Menma waved a hand dismissively, his tone as nonchalant as though making a guess of tomorrow's weather. However, the implications of his words cut deeply. Menma was implying they'd neglected their son, that they'd hardly showed him enough love to convince the older Namikaze child that they wouldn't readily give him up in just such a situation. How can you stand there, with him, when he wants to kill your brother? Kushina hissed, eyebrows drawn together, taking half a step forward to jab a finger in Menma's chest. Menma sighed and looked towards Itachi, who didn't return his gaze. As far as he was concerned, this was Menma's problem to deal with. Madara-sama was being dramatic. He doesn't want to kill Naruto. There's just something that he needs to do, and it happens to be something only Naruto can do. What would be more accurate to say, is that Naruto can't do it, unless he's dead. Menma offered with a shrug. Kushina's quick jerking motions caused another ripple of unease through the Konoha forces as she brought the back of her hand harshly across Menma's face. The sharp smack of her slapping Menma would no doubt have carried far enough for them to have heard it. Madara knew they were trigger-happy at this point. It wouldn't take much for them to break formation, and that would be their downfall. Minato grabbed Kushina's wrist, physically keeping her from further assaulting their son, while Menma didn't react to the slap other than a clenching of his fists. The bright angry imprint left behind on his cheek seemed to symbolize their growing distance as a familial unit. Minato wasn't sure when Menma had gotten so cold. He was even more confused as to how he, the Hokage and the boy's father, hadn't noticed. And you support this? Minato questioned, his tone showing how strained he was, how hard he was working to keep the negotiations calm and on track. He knew his sons didn't exactly get along, but this was extreme. To side with a man intent on ending his son's life? For a purpose he could only guess at. Kushina pulled her wrist free forcefully, taking a step back but not daring to take her furious gaze off of Madara and Menma. I do. Hatake Kakashi was correct when he pushed for you to see Naruto as more than a failure. His potential is staggering. Did you know that he's a powerful sensor? Better than anyone in the village actually. I'd say he could sense us right now. Menma mused. His mastery over the Rasengan during that small training period of his was quite impressive. Menma paused, a soft smile on his face as he thought of his younger brother. Kushina's gaze, however, was wide in shock. She'd never heard Menma actually praise Naruto before. Yet, you two chose to leave him in the village. I'm sure it wasn't a decision you came to on your own, was it, Ka-san? Menma looked to his mother, his gaze as piercing as it had always been and his features as blank as they usually were, the smile completely absent. Uzumaki Mito has always had far too much say in what goes on in our family. A family she should never had had a say in the first place, considering we're not Uzumaki. Menma's tone was cold, resentful even, his gaze narrowing and sharpening as he directed it towards his mother. Kushina flinched, not expecting such coldness from her son. His violet eyes showed her he wasn't messing around. He wasn't doing this as some sort of self-sacrificing notion to get behind enemy lines. Her son, her darling child, was her enemy. Every inch of his being, from his chakra to his posture, told her that he was rejecting them, wholly and deeply. Why? What did Madara have over him? Minato remained silent, analyzing to try and gather as much information that he could, something to help them win this war, anything. So if you're not going to hand over Naruto, then we have nothing more to discuss, Madara sighed in mock disappointment, intent on stopping the conversation between Menma and his parents. Keeping things short and sweet had more of a lasting effect. I suppose we should get on with this little war thing. I hope you're ready. This time, the sadness sounded almost genuine. He turned, intent on going back to the Uchiha. Menma and Itachi lingered, intent on ensuring no sneak attacks would occur while Madara's back was turned. Not that such attacks would have been successful. With Madara's peaceful return to his clan, the Konoha forces were left wondering what now? Minato and Kushina both squared their shoulders, resigning themselves to the fact that this was it. There was no going back. When faced with handing over their son, they knew there never really had been any other choice. They waited a moment more, watching as Menma and Itachi turned away to follow Madara, who hadn't gone more than 3 steps before a voice called loudly across the grasslands. "That's enough, Madara, I'm right here." Naruto flashed into appearance, panting as though he'd just run flat out, and perhaps he had. His features were determined, eyes blazing with an emotion that made Madara nostalgic. This boy, he wasn't the Shodai. That much was obvious in his chakra, as well as his body language. He was a village-loving idiot, powerful in his own right, but still entirely namikaze Naruto. Had Hashirama really succeeded in his foolish mission to return the Shodai to his true present? It wasn't appearing likely any time soon. "Naruto! Get out of here!" Kushina screamed, about to run towards him only to be stopped by Menma. "Get out of my way!" Kushina banged on Menma's chest only for him to embrace her, physically pulling her away from Naruto, while she clawed at the arm he'd clamped around his waist. "Get him out of here!" Minato roared towards the shinobi forces he'd brought with him. Someone. Anyone. He himself had been engaged by Itachi. The genius Uchiha had been smart enough to snag his uniform, preventing him from jumping to Naruto. If he jumped to Naruto, Itachi would come with. Itachi pulled on Minato's cloak, dragging him away from Kushina so he couldn't interfere there as well. Haruto was the first to jump forwards, Kakashi following him only to pull him backwards. Arashi joined Kakashi in stopping his grandfather from approaching. Minato could only guess as to what the two were aggressively trying to tell Haruto as they wrestled him back to enemy lines. An order was an order, however, and no matter what, it needed to be obeyed. Yet, no matter who sprang to obey his order, Madara was closer than any of them. He got to Naruto in the blink of an eye, hand grasping Naruto's jacket and lifting him into the air. Well, aren't you a pathetic creature? Are you sure you're Menma's bother? Madara grinned, enjoying the defiance and irritation on Naruto's face. This wasn't the Shodai, but there were parts that absolutely reeked of the resemblance to the man. 2 shinobi whom Kakashi couldn't reach in time rushed towards their group only for a bolt of lightning to race across the grasslands and strike them both before they'd managed more than 100 meters. Naruto knew that lightning belonged to Sasuke. The young Uchiha had not moved from the Uchiha camp, yet he'd managed to send his jutsu across the entire battleground. Had Kakashi somehow known that Sasuke would be the one to retaliate? Was that his motivations behind stopping the attempts to approach? "Well, I'm here, what do you want from me?" Naruto growled, gripping Madara's hand on his jacket and trying to pry the man's fingers loose as he did his best to ignore Sasuke's cold actions. "Let's see. It's simple, really. All I want is for you to open some boxes." Madara waved a hand and Shisui appeared, 4 of the tailed beast boxes laid down on the ground before Madara in the blink of an eye. Madara hadn't even batted an eye at the reactions of those around him, his attention solely and utterly on the youngest namikaze. Naruto narrowed his gaze. 4? Where were the other 4? Surely Madara wouldn't have made a move until he had all the boxes? Then again, 4 tailed beasts were more than enough. Was he running out of time, and if so, what was he racing against? Madara threw Naruto towards the boxes where he slid across the ground painfully. "Open them, and I'll let you go. You leave, your family leaves. We're all so much happier." His gaze was cold, unflinching. Naruto pulled himself into a seated position, wiping the dust away from his cheek that had been scraped across the ground. "What's in the boxes?" Naruto asked, playing dumb once again. "And what makes you think I can open them?" "Not as dumb as you look. Madara inclined his head and narrowed his gaze to show his growing impatience. You can open them because you have a very special chakra. But you knew that. Naruto didn't miss the fact that Madara didn't intend to answer all his questions. Stop wasting my time. It's very valuable, you know. Open them, or you die where you sit. Madara was serious. Naruto studied the boxes. They were simple. Plain. Made from the metal of the Uzumaki Kekkei Genkai. They couldn't be opened without his chakra and the bloodline. They didn't appear to be fakes. They were the real deal. Naruto moved to pick up the first one. He placed a hand on it before quickly snatching it away, making a big pretense of being scared. There was a malevolent presence emanating from the box, and anyone who touched it would know that. He had to believe and show that he believed that opening it would be disastrous. No. I won't do it. Whatever is in there, it's dangerous. Well, I imagine a few decades in a box would make anyone murderous. Madara shrugged. But I'm beginning to lose my patience, boy. Open the box. His Sharingan activated in his annoyance, and Naruto flinched back. It was always a fearsome sight, having Madara's ire directed towards oneself. Yet, he squared his shoulders. He was determined to not open those boxes. He'd made a promise of a lifetime after all. I won't do it. You might as well kill me. I'm not going to open those boxes. Madara looked towards Menma. He knew Naruto. He knew that look. He was serious and not likely to change his mind without some serious motivation. Not even if I kill your mother? Menma's face paled, but he stood firm. Naruto felt his chakra, its confusion. Perhaps Madara had promised not to kill Naruto and his parents, only to threaten death. Perhaps Menma's objectives were to protect them from this third party, and he felt Madara was the closest he was going to get to protecting those he loved. Well, Menma was in too deep now to pull out. Naruto almost felt sorry for him. He let shock dominate his features at Madara's suggestion, even though he was more curious as to why Madara was looking at Menma when he made the suggestion in the first place. He let his eyes grow glassy with unshed tears as he shook his head slowly, as though in shocked disbelief. Was Madara serious or merely making threats to manipulate him? Naruto honestly wasn't sure. Don't you open those boxes, Naruto-kun. Forget about me. Kushina was trying to keep her features light and encouraging, trying to convey all the love in her heart as Naruto looked to her to help him with such an awful decision. Naruto, whatever he does to us, you cannot open those boxes. Minato added, silently trying to tell Naruto that if they died, then no one would blame him. Naruto knew that his reactions were key. His normal overly emotional bullheadedness was in order. He had to defend his parents. There was no way anyone would believe he'd sit idly by while Madara threatened their lives. With a sudden yell of anger, Naruto sprang at Madara, a Rasengan already forming in his palm. Madara stepped to the side, the attack landing on the floor. Perhaps if I beat you enough you'll change your mind. He landed a solid blow to Naruto's stomach, hard enough for the teen to cough up blood. You're utterly out of your league, boy. Madara chided. Naruto, on all fours and heaving for breath that just wouldn't come, tried to think of what to do next, how to react to everything around him. Thinking was going to get him into more trouble. Thinking wasn't his forte. He needed to just act. A shunshine allowed him to get behind Madara, and by some grace of Kami land a solid kick to the man's back. He backflipped away, landing into a crouch and wiping away the blood dribbling down his chin. He pulled out a kunai as Madara swung to face him with a snarl. Naruto blinked and suddenly Madara's fist was buried in his stomach. He flew into the air, but Madara grabbed his ankle and slammed him into the ground. Damn, having such little chakra to work with was really turning out to be more painful than he'd anticipated, but this beating would serve a greater purpose. Konoha would understand that they needed to fear Madara, that they needed to stay clear of his rage. Still, he couldn't breathe. The thought was urgent, all-consuming to the point where the pain didn't matter. His mother's screams didn't matter. His father's struggles to reach him didn't matter. He scrambled to get to his feet, fingers clawing at the ground as he tried to find purchase, to find balance. Madara's hand clamped onto his throat and lifted. Naruto could barely focus on the red of the man's swirling Sharingan as his head swam. He probably had a concussion and then some. Let go, the whispered command in his mind was almost a welcomed one. Before Haruto approaches, Madara will kill him. There was an urgency to the command that the clone understood. Naruto fixed Madara with a look, one that he desperately hoped the man would understand. Kill me. He wheezed around the suffocating breathlessness. Perhaps he'd punctured a lung. Who knew? Madara's Sharingan stilled, the only sign he gave of his shock. "Kill me, Baka." Naruto hardened his gaze. Haruto had managed to break free from the formation where Kakashi and Arashi had been holding him back. He was running straight for them, Menma and Itachi entirely unable to stop him. Shisui could, but that meant leaving the boxes unprotected. Haruto was skilled enough to evade Sasuke's lightning, and that meant he was fast. Naruto needed to end this, and in the next few seconds. Madara did not move, eyes taking in his face, trying to decipher the hidden meaning, if there even was one. "Madara, please." Naruto almost whimpered. "Almost. There you are." Madara grinned, his hand jerking instantly and the clone going still with a loud snap filling the air. And then, silence. Sasuke and stopped trying to attack, Minato and Kushina had stopped struggling. Only Haruto, silent and deadly, was still trying to reach Naruto, still refusing to give up and acknowledge what his eyes had seen. Kushina's scream of anguish was the only sound in the deathly silence that gripped the shinobi forces as Madara threw the clone at Haruto. The Uzumaki caught the lifeless body, skidding to a stop in shock. He stared down at the battered boy, in complete disbelief. Why go to all the trouble, only to end the boy's life in a mere moment? Should he have tried to use his chains? His control hadn't been what he would have liked, and so he hadn't so much as dared in case he had hurt the boy. Menma had gone still, the only reason Kushina had been able to shove him away and dash towards Haruto. She grasped Naruto's jacket, pulling her youngest son to her chest where she hugged him close, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Naruto, oh Naruto." Madara looked at the boy's eyes, still open and completely devoid of life. He frowned. Had he been wrong? Had he just killed a young boy for absolutely no reason? It hadn't been his intention. He had been so sure that he'd seen the boy as a clone. His Sharingan did not lie, so why was there a body? Minato, on the other hand, became a man possessed. With a scream of utter rage, raw enough to break, raw enough to sting, he threw a kunai at Madara, who stepped backwards. Minato flashed in front of the Uchiha, Itachi looking much like a stuffed animal who'd been pulled along unwillingly. He immediately let go of the Hokage. Madara could deal with that mess. He instead turned to Menma and pulled him toward Shisui. There were consequences for this path, and they were going to have to start preparing. The plan had never been to kill Naruto. Minato already had a Rasengan in hand, slamming it towards Madara, who hadn't been able to dodge. He took the full force of the jutsu, well, he would have, had a hand not grasped Minato's wrist at the last second and pulled him off course and towards the ground, Rasengan hitting with an earth-shattering impact and flying into the air. Madara jumped away from the crumbling ground and closer to the Uchiha compound. Minato growled, ready to attack the person who'd interfered, only to lose his momentum immediately upon seeing exactly who was holding his wrist. Now Madara, was killing the boy really all that necessary? A familiar voice chided. Madara looked towards the hand's owner, seeing the bright orange armor, the whiskered cheeks, the sunshine blonde hair, and the ocean blue eyes of the Shodai. Chapter 27. Minato stepped back slightly, assessing the situation, though it was extremely difficult. He wanted nothing more than to slice the Uchiha bastard to ribbons, but he needed to know what the hell was going on. At any rate, what a kami-damn understatement on the Shodai's part. Madara gestured towards Minato, his expression bland. "This is the all-amazing Namikaze Minato? I expected more." The Shodai tisked, letting go of Minato's wrist, choosing to ignore Madara and walking over to Kushina, who was still hugging Naruto as tightly as she could. Minato followed, yet keeping a close eye on Madara. This distraction may prove fatal if he wasn't careful. "May I?" The Shodai gestured an intention to take Naruto from Kushina's grasp, and for a moment she resisted. "What are you going to do with him?" Kushina asked, hopeful that perhaps there was something the Shodai could do to save her son. Why else would he want to take him? Give him the respect he deserves. He was very brave. The Shodai's gaze softened and Kushina let go so that he could pick Naruto up. "Did you see? Were you there?" Kushina's tone had darkened, perhaps silently demanding why he hadn't done anything to save her son. "I saw in my own way. Yet not in the way you imagine." Naruto replied regretfully. The Shodai gently closed the boy's eyes before lifting him and carrying him towards the Konoha forces. Minato wanted to follow, but he also wanted to take the moment to attack Madara again. This might be the best opening he'd get. "Hokage-sama, it would greatly gratify me if you followed me. Please bring your wife as well," the Shodai stated, sending the current Hokage a glance over his shoulder, one that demanded he obey. showing a stern determination not unlike the determination he'd see in his own son's eyes. If you're going there, then should I take it we're enemies? Madara called after their retreating forms, watching them go with a thoughtful expression. Naruto paused a moment, considering his response. He turned to face Madara, his features blank. 1 day? Give me 1 day to assess the situation. Your clan stays on their side, Konoha forces stays on their own side. Fine, you have 6 hours. But I want to talk to you, alone. At your convenience. Madara turned signaling that Shisui, Menma, and Itachi should follow him, the boxes disappearing as they walked back towards the rest of the Uchiha clan. Naruto's gaze moved over the opposing forces. They had used their week to prepare their defenses. A surprise attack would not have been very successful. There were jutsu traps, seals, and physical barriers all around the Uchiha forces. Minato didn't miss the fact that the man had addressed the Konoha forces as though he was not one of them. In fact, he appeared to be entirely neutral. He'd stopped the attack on Madara, yet he wasn't helping the man either. How was he here? What was his objective? Minato moved to Kushina, wrapping an arm around her waist in a poor attempt at consoling her as she quietly sobbed into her hands. Naruto turned away from the Uchiha. 6 hours wasn't as much as he wanted, but it was something. He would have to make the most of it. There would no doubt be questions, and there would be arguments. He'd have to handle them all in the coming 6 hours. He wanted to go to the infirmary tent. They'd set up the basics the moment they'd arrived, and for that he was impressed. For their first major conflict they'd managed to cover a lot of the basic necessities. To save time he shunshined closer to the Konoha base before walking through its entrance. Kushina and Haruto broke away from them, moving towards what Naruto assumed as the command tent. As they walked, the Konoha forces grew deathly quiet, unsure of what to make of this new development. It wasn't a situation they had encountered before, and to be fair, Naruto hadn't provided proof that he was the Shodai at all. He could be a spy, an infiltrator, an enemy. Yet no one stopped them, each shinobi moving out of the way with a stun bow. Naruto allowed his gaze to travel over the people Minato and Kushina had chosen to bring with them. Some he knew, others were completely unknown to him, but scrutinizing them was for a little later. For now, he had to solidify his place amongst those in charge. They had to believe he was who he said he was. He arrived at the tent, taking note of and approving of its placement near the command tent. He carefully placed the clone on an empty bed, covering his still form with a sheet. Movement from the far side of the tent caught his attention and he glanced towards it, taking note of a very familiar-looking Hyuga medic. Hinata. She looked as kind-hearted as she had before, yet perhaps a tad more outgoing. There wasn't a headband around her neck, or anywhere on her person. That's Hyuga Hinata. She's a volunteer for this war against Madara. She's devoted her time to medical ninjutsu, despite not formally going to and graduating from the academy. Minato explained curtly, noticing Naruto's interest. Naruto turned his gaze away from her and she seemed to relax. He straightened, quiet for a moment before asking, "What did you intend to gain from this war, Namikaze-sama?" Naruto turned to the man whose chakra was still raging. He was brilliant. Seeing his son die in front of him, yet here he stood. A picture-perfect shinobi, no less an even more inspiring leader. If one was looking for a puppet. There was no way I was handing over my son. Minato started. What came of this war is what came of it. What I intended to gain was nothing short of complete and utter victory. It was a cold statement, hard and unyielding. I still intend that. If you think I can walk away now, you're dead wrong. I suppose you have your own questions. However, I'd like for you to give me a moment if I may have it. Naruto inclined his head. Now that he had revealed his presence, his investigations would take on a different meaning, different pieces of the puzzle becoming more accessible as each minute passed. What I can say for now, as I'm sure the thought has crossed your mind, I truly am the Shodai. No tricks or lies. As for how I am here. Well, on the day Hashirama and I were ambushed, I attempted a sealed jutsu that had unforeseen consequences. The lie was intentional, aimed at seeing who knew the truth and who did not. Not all my seals should have been used in combat, and this is a clear example of why. Naruto looked down, feigning frustration. So I should just take you at your word? Minato questioned, his tone showing his skepticism. No. Ask Mito. She's here somewhere. I can sense her presence. Naruto gave a humorless smile. His father wasn't the Hokage for nothing. Minato stared at him for a moment before turning and walking out of the infirmary tent. Strangely, he'd been the only one to follow Naruto into the tent. It was perhaps an order from the current Hokage. We should head over to the command station. We'll need to factor your arrival into our plans, Minato stated carefully. Naruto noticed that Minato didn't view him as an asset. Not yet anyway, and that was interesting. As they walked away from the infirmary tent, Naruto noticed an Uzumaki medic nin walk in. Long yet choppy red hair, red-rimmed glasses, and bite scars running along one arm. He didn't know her, but something in her chakra felt familiar. Had he perhaps met her in his previous life? Perhaps not formally. He might have sensed her chakra before he was even aware that he was a sensor. Her scars, they spoke of one of the Uzumaki's more interesting traits. Interesting and horrific. Healing the wounded, though chakra transfer and the trigger for those unfortunate Uzumaki was a bite deep enough to break the skin. Naruto had detested the method. He'd banned its barbaric practice to something that was only in times of extremities. So why was this Uzumaki bearing the signs of frequent healing? She appeared to be one of the more important medics. Her uniform indicated someone in charge, someone to go to when dire decisions needed to be made. Karen-sama. Hinata greeted from inside the tent, voice faint, and showing a great deal of respect. Naruto turned his attention away from the infirmary tent as they entered the command tent. The chakra inside this tent was heavy, powerful, as well as the most familiar to him. Kushina, no longer crying, was seated next to Mito, who looked gravely serious. They were familiar to him. Mito's chakra was still vibrant. Oddly enough. A person's chakra was supposed to reflect their age. Naruto concluded that Mito was far younger than what she wanted those around them to believe she was. Exactly like Madara. What had those two done? The conversations in the room stopped as each participant turned to them. Minato went to the head of the command table and seated himself. This, supposedly, is the Shodai Hokage, Uzumaki Naruto. Minato waved a hand in Naruto's direction. He's managed to buy us 6 hours. Naruto remained standing near the door, taking in the familiar faces. Haruto stood close to Kushina, almost like a bodyguard. Given the fact that his mother was the clan head in training, it wouldn't be far from the truth. He didn't dwell on Haruto for too long. He didn't want to see the man's face when the realization that his father was standing in front of him hit. Naruto needed a moment more before he confronted that issue. Hiruzen gave him a look, one that Naruto wasn't sure was positive or not, before nodding in greeting. It's been a long time, Shodai-sama. Naruto inclined his head in return, taking the moment to focus on Hiruzen's chakra. It was understandably buzzed, taking recent events into consideration. Next to Hiruzen sat Dansu, unbandaged and free of the chakra malice Naruto had sensed from him in the past. Dansu appeared to have a close bond with Hiruzen if their overlapping chakra was anything to go by. They spent a lot of their time together. Naruto wondered if retirement had anything to do with it. Peaceful times and retired ninja meant that there wasn't a whole lot to really do other than visit your comrades. Behind the two were what Naruto would refer to as the Sannin, even if in this world they hadn't been granted such a title. Tsunade, happier than Naruto had ever seen her, was standing in between Jiraiya and Orochimaru. She looked just as strong and capable as she'd ever been. Her chakra spoke of a high affinity for medical ninjutsu, and the chakra gem was still on her forehead. As Naruto's gaze moved to the white-haired Sannin, he felt a painful jolt in his chest. Jiraiya wasn't wearing his Mount Myaboku headband, so Naruto could only assume he hadn't signed a contract with the Toads. How strange. Yet, everything else about him was completely and utterly Jiraiya, so much so that Naruto had to hold his breath to keep the tears at bay. This man was his most beloved sensei, and yet, he wasn't. This man didn't know him, and Namikaze Naruto only knew him as his father's sensei. There had been very little interaction between them in this lifetime. He knew he couldn't let his gaze linger for more than a moment and forced himself to move on to the next and last Sannin. Orochimaru, most surprisingly, had an aged appearance that matched Jiraiya's. His chakra no longer had the sickly slime feeling to it, and it didn't even hint at a snake summon. Instead, this Orochimaru seemed to have a hawk summoning contract. His features were serene, if somewhat guarded given the circumstances, and he held himself very carefully. A man older than his father yet younger than Tsunade shifted closer to the later, focusing Naruto's attention away from Orochimaru and towards himself. Naruto took in the feel of his chakra, the close resemblance it held to Tsunade's, and concluded that this man must be Senju Nawaki. Their resemble was closer to Kizuna, Hashirama's daughter. However, given the feel of their chakra, these siblings were descendants from Nawaki, Hashirama's son. His gaze didn't linger, intent on not drawing suspicions, moving over to a familiar chakra. Hatake Kakashi sat near a man who looked almost identical to him. Naruto had heard bits and pieces about Kakashi's family. He'd only managed to learn that Kakashi's father had been extremely powerful and that he had died when Kakashi was very young. This man must be Kakashi's father, and Tobirama's grandson. He was seated next to Nawaki, his posture relaxed but deadly. The posture of a powerful shinobi who knew exactly how powerful they were. Hyuga Hyashi, Inuzuka Tsume, Aburame Shibi, Akimichi Kuza, Nara Shikaku, Yamanaka Inoiki, so many that he knew, and a few that he did not, heads of the clans he'd poached from other parts of the elemental nations. Yet, the people seated in this war tent told him one simple and unavoidable truth. You won't win this war, Naruto stated simply, and with enough certainty to gain the instant ire of more than a few members. What the hell gives you the right to just show up, take one look at us and just decide that we're automatically going to lose? Tsume growled. Madara isn't someone to be taken lightly. He doesn't need his clan in order to defeat the forces that have been gathered here. It was a smart move to leave the majority of Konoha's forces in the village, however I see all the leaders are here. Naruto replied, unfazed by the anger directed towards him. That means no one is in the village, keeping those forces in line. If this tent were to be targeted right now, what and who would be left in the village? I'd imagine the best of Konoha's forces are standing in this camp, and if I'm wrong I'll stab myself with my own kunai. How can we trust that you are who you say you are? Kakashi asked coolly, his chakra just as steady. You are, after all, a man who is supposed to be dead. The man had decided to redirect the conversation lest tensions become more physically acted upon. The man had a point though. Fair point, Hatake-san. Naruto inclined his head. If they thought it strange that Naruto knew who he was addressing, they'd soon be in for a shock. Naruto could quite accurately guess where each person came from based on their chakra alone. Yamanaka-san is more than welcome to examine my mind, and you'll find that Mito-sama and Hiruzen-chan can easily confirm my identity. Naruto sent Hiruzen a teasing smile, one the older shinobi did not return. Instead he looked towards Mito, who did not take her gaze off of Naruto. He sighed and spoke quietly. He is the Shodai. You would do well not to waste time trying to verify this fact. As the Hokage stated, we have much to plan. I have a question, but I'll wait until after I've spoken with Madara to ask it, Naruto stated calmly, his gaze on Mito. For now I will remain impartial. I haven't been here long enough to understand the situation fully, and before I act, I'd very much like a moment to assess the situation. Remain impartial? Hiruzen asked, his tone showing confusion. Yet it was Kushina's chakra that reacted the most to his statement. Is my son's death not enough for you to understand the situation? Kushina hissed in anger, her body tensed in her effort to hold herself back. I don't know what more you'd need to assess. While I deeply regret your son's death, I cannot allow it to cloud my feelings on the matter. I'd be lying if I said it was the first time I'd watched Madara kill a child, Naruto sighed. I would also be lying if I said that action alone makes him my enemy. Unfortunately, I am far too skilled a censor to really believe that Madara means Konoha harm. I am here to ensure that Konoha survives. Madara has not yet presented himself as an enemy of the village. Pardon my suggesting it, but could your sensing not be fooled? Shikaku asked, before Kushina could respond. Yes and no. My sensing ability is able to penetrate down to a person's core. It would take considerable skill and experience to be able to lie all the way down to one's core. Naruto replied with a soft smile. Madara may have such skill and experience, but the Uchiha and Uzumaki around him did not. Then, why not speak to him now? Shikaku suggested. If you do, then with the remaining time allotted to us, and with the information you learn, provided you're willing to share it with us, we could formulate better responses to the situation. I agree with your assessment that Uchiha Madara has not presented himself as a typical enemy of Konoha. There have been some things troubling me, things I have not been able to explain, and that is a very new sensation for me. An agreeable suggestion, Nara-san, astute as ever, and I am pleased that you noticed Madara's odd actions. Before I go to Madara, however, I would like to ask Mito where my boxes are. Madara only had 4. I'm not foolish enough to believe he didn't get the remaining 4. Each person in the room turned to the aged Uzumaki. I'm afraid I'm not the person who knows where they are. Mito replied steadily. Naruto released a breath, his chakra boiling in his coils. Don't play games with me, Mito. He took a step towards her, watching as Kushina readied herself, as Haruto's hand twitched towards his pouch. They wouldn't be fast enough. For one, stop lying about being the clan head. You stepped down years ago. Naruto raised a glowing hand. For another, stop lying about being old. Your chakra is far too vibrant for that. He shunned Shin before anyone could react and touched a hand to her forehead, breaking the seal that had been in place. Where a frail wisp of a woman once sat, a strong, noble and definitely young Mito was now seated. Trust you to reveal all my secrets. Mito huffed in annoyance. Eh? Naruto jerked backwards. Edo Tensei? But how? The shock was soon replaced with anger. Who? Who did you sacrifice in order to be brought back to life? Who? No one important. Mito replied quietly. Clearly she didn't want to talk about it. Naruto didn't care. He slammed a hand onto the table. Who? Mito didn't say a word and Naruto growled in anger. Don't you dare belittle a person's sacrifice to no one important. It matters to me, Mito, everyone makes a difference no matter how big or small, enemy or ally. Everyone makes a difference. Uzumaki Nami. She volunteered knowing what it meant. But she also understood why it was necessary. Mito replied, eyes fierce as she refused to take Nami's sacrifice for granted. We tweak the jutsu so that the person is still alive in spirit. I talk to her every day, and I take very good care of her family. In a way, they're my family too. It was the best we could do without testing the changes every time we tweak something. Mito looked down, unable to meet Naruto's furious gaze. And that's supposed to make it better? You can hear her in your head? Does that make you feel better about taking her life? Naruto growled, leaning down to jut his face into Mito's, forcing her to meet his gaze. If the jutsu ended, if you went away, does she get her life back? How long have you even been here, a living corpse? Mito remained silent, but Naruto sensed the pain his words were causing her. He needed to push her. He needed to see who the third party was, and conflict was the only way he knew how to bring them out. Tell me why? Tell me that those damned boxes are not the reason you're sitting there and I'm standing here right now. He slammed both hands on the table, with a sharp smack. Mito jumped and Kushina's anger began to boil. If he wasn't careful, she'd hit him. Well, she'd try too. They are, Mito stated quietly. But Naruto, you know how important those boxes are. Mito's fire suddenly flared as she matched Naruto's glare. We need them. Mito sprang to her feet, forcing Naruto to take a step backwards. No, we don't. And if that's your opinion, if you're so desperate to get them to go so far as to use Edo Tensei, then maybe standing with Madara is where I should be. Naruto swept an arm through the air as though striking away the very idea of needing to use the technique. You've got all these people fooled into your war with Madara. I won't stand here and let innocent people die all because you and Madara are on some deluded power trip. He turned on his heel, marching towards the door. So that's it? You're joining Madara? You've made up your mind? Hiruzen called after him, making Naruto pause. Naruto glanced back at the old man, his features a dark cloud of anger. I'm going to go find out the truth. Mito can join me when she's ready to tell me everything. 0.0.0.0 Madara watched as Naruto stormed across the grasslands, moving towards the Uchiha compound in what appeared to be a foul mood. The fact that he was walking and not shunshinning was interesting. Did he want the time to think? Madara didn't approach him. He'd wait. He was earlier than expected though, so things probably hadn't gone well. Madara-sama, should we not go out to meet him? Itachi asked, his tone showing a concern Madara didn't understand, didn't comment on either. He'd long since stopped trying to understand Itachi. No. He's angry. Better to let him walk. It'll take him 5 to 10 minutes to get here. By the time he arrives he'll feel better. Madara waved a hand. Be a dear and bring some tea so long, ne Itachi-kun. He knew that Itachi would do what was asked, even if the way he chose to address the boy was meant to ruffle his feathers. Hadn't worked yet. He was as stoic as ever. Itachi bowed before moving to do as asked, Menma stepping away from the pillar he'd been leaning against in order to follow. The fact that Menma was pissed at him didn't really escape his notice. The boy hadn't deduced that the young Naruto had been nothing but a clone, and therefore he fully believed Madara had killed his beloved little brother. Madara hadn't corrected him because Naruto seemed to want the world to think that the young boy was dead. Although, making Madara play the bad guy was simply uncalled for. It was commendable that Menma was still here, and hadn't gone back to his parents despite his one request seemingly having been denied. He moved away from the main entrance and towards a small open tent, that was mostly bare of any items. He sat down on one of the 3 available cushions, intent on waiting for Naruto to arrive. Madara watched Arushi sneak into the room from the corner of his eye. He knew Sasuke wouldn't be far behind the younger Uchiha. Arushi grinned at him before holding out a kunai. "Come watch me play?" "Really, Shi-chan? This old man is too boring to hang around," Madara said with a pretend yawn. Arushi shrugged before lifting the kunai and aiming to throw it straight at Madara. She wasn't expecting Sasuke to arrive and catch the thrown kunai instead. "Aw, Sasuke," Arushi whined, "I need to practice." Sasuke tisked and grabbed her hand, intending on taking her away from the tent. When Naruto arrived, he didn't care for the defenses that had been put into place and simply shunshin to Madara's side. "Edo fucking tensei." He exploded immediately upon arriving, only to have a disgruntled Uchiha Sasuke snap, "Oi, mind your language." Naruto jumped, turning towards the young Uchiha who had been behind him and holding the hand of his younger sister. Madara chuckled, pointing to Sasuke before commenting, "I don't get your obsession with the brat." "Hey, I wouldn't call it an obsession." Naruto remembered just in time that he'd never told Madara about the clan massacre. To Madara, the only Uchiha he'd ever mentioned must have been Sasuke. Sasuke tilted his head in confusion but otherwise didn't comment. It felt a lot like those times that where Naruto hadn't made sense. Could there be a connection? And if so, what could it be? Naruto raised his eyebrows at Madara questioningly, before looking toward Shi. Madara shrugged. "What can I say, she likes me. I'm a hit with all the ladies." He added a lazy grin for good measure. Naruto snorted but otherwise didn't dignify the statement with a response. "Come Sasuke, Shi-chan. Time to leave. The Shodai and I need to talk." Madara looked to the other 2 Uchiha who bowed low and left without comment. He then moved to the tea set Itachi had brought earlier. "So you know the truth of Mito's existence, I take it? And you? How is your existence different?" Naruto challenged, daring the Uchiha to say Edo Tensei as well. "Knowing you, and seeing your work with seals, well, it made me rather interested in the craft. Let's just leave it there." Madara smiled wryly. That meant he could have hopped through time as Naruto had, or he had stopped time on his body. A dangerous seal to attempt, but one, Naruto felt, that with access to the Sharingan might just be possible. It didn't matter. A seal was way better than Edo Tensei. The consequences were your own to take on, and didn't rely on harming another person. At least it shouldn't. Still, to be so desperate. Naruto accepted the cup of tea Madara offered him. Strangely, despite the circumstances, he felt at peace. He and Madara had always gotten along in a special way. It was probably because Madara was the only one who knew about Naruto's part in his father's death. It was also probably Naruto's insistence of making sure he didn't become a broody bastard like Sasuke had. "Seeing as you didn't punch me first, I'm assuming you've gathered that there's more going on than what Hashirama or Mito have told us?" Madara asked, with a deep frown. "Which means you've been here longer than what you want the world to think." "Hi, I've been here a few weeks already. Didn't know you were still around until you tried grabbing me. Somehow, I feel like things would have been easier if you'd succeeded there." Naruto played with the rim of the cup in his hands, using it to avoid Madara's gaze. "At first I may have thought Mito was the enemy, but I mean, she's had access to Naruto for years. Why didn't she just train and manipulate him to her will? Same as you weren't the enemy because you could have gotten hold of Naruto without the pretense of a war. So that leaves me to assume there's a third party. So what's the deal? Why the war? I mean, I'm here, not really just because I'm angry about the Edo Tensei. That just shows how desperate she is. But it's also to make the third party think it's us against them. A united front that they'll have to reveal themselves against. If they don't, then at least we'll know that they think they're too powerful to worry about us being problematic. First, let's talk about Mito. Then we'll come back to me," Madara said, eyes distant. When Hashirama came back that day, at first it kind of felt numb, unreal. The great Uzumaki Naruto killed in a simple ambush. Then, like with my father, the little things just didn't add up. For example, if you two had spontaneously gone on patrol, then why was there an ambush party waiting in the first place? And you wanted answers. Naruto guessed, with a knowing sigh. And Hashirama wasn't willing to be forthcoming. Madara finished. "I can't understand why though. There's something they're not telling us, didn't want to tell us. Maybe they couldn't tell you." Madara finished his tea in one gulp before standing and beginning to pace. "Well, it's a damn frustration is what it is. I haven't managed to figure it out, and I'm assuming she told you nothing. Well, no. But I know she wants the boxes. When the ceiling wonders were being broken, I knew there were two parties involved. Just too much difference in how they were being broken, and the time frame. So quickly, like it was a race or something, Naruto sighed, falling backwards and staring at the ceiling of the tent as Madara paced. You all missed the one in Konoha though. A ninth one? Madara asked with a snort. Should have known Kyuubi would end up in a box as well. Naruto laughed. Where did you think he went? The moon? With you? One can never be too sure. Why do you want the boxes? Naruto asked quietly. Madara's pacing paused as he considered his answer. Same as her, I guess. Power. If I have them then no one else has them and they can't be used against me. As it is, she has 4. Naruto dearly hoped that Madara's intentions were more complex than mere power. Did he plan to use the tailed beasts for protection or attacking? Did he simply want to keep them out of the hands of others so that they couldn't be used against Konoha? He pouted with the thought, if they just left the boxes then no one would have them. No one would have known about them and they'd have faded into obscurities of history long ago. That wasn't about to happen anytime soon. Naruto jumped to his feet as well. Let's go see my darling older brother. He has an interesting perspective on Mito. Naruto moved to the door. He's pissed at you though. I can feel Itachi and Menma arguing. What makes you think he knows anything? Naruto blinked at him in surprise. A camp full of Uchiha and you're wondering about the only Namikaze in your midst. He's here for a reason and I want to know what that reason is. Madara shrugged, leaving Naruto to lead the way. Naruto's sensing was second to none. As they walked through the camp the Uchiha stopped their tasks to bow low to Madara. Naruto wasn't sure if he was included in the bow but he didn't ask. As they neared Itachi and Menma's tent, the two stilled, the argument cutting off. Just before they entered Madara grabbed Naruto's sleeve. You going to tell him it was a clone? Nah. He's a dick. Gonna leave him to sweat about it for a little longer. Right now, the fact that he'd still here, means that whatever caused him to come to you in the first place is a bigger problem than his love for his little brother. Madara nodded once and Naruto pulled back the entrance to the tent. Uzumaki. I wish to ask you some questions. Naruto's entire demeanor changed to that of the fearsome Shodai. He meant business. He also didn't want Menma seeing much resemblance between his younger brother and the Shodai. Appearance was one thing, but mannerisms were another entirely. Understood. Menma stood to attention. How can I assist, Hokage-sama? He shifted slightly, and it's Namikaze, not Uzumaki. Naruto had made the distinction on purpose. The boy's chakra was more Uzumaki-like than what he'd allowed himself to act like. Must have been exhausting. Tell me what you know of Uzumaki Mito and your mother, Naruto stated moving towards the bed and gesturing for Menma to do the same. Madara sat next to Naruto and Itachi sat across from them, forcing Menma to follow. So, let's get started. Naruto prompted. How and what do you know? Chapter 28. Menma squared his shoulders before taking a deep breath and looking at Naruto directly. The fact that the man seated across from him was the Shodai was perhaps a little hard to believe but Madara hadn't batted an eye so he didn't doubt it. Still, the resemblance to his brother was uncanny. Was his mother directly related to the Shodai or something? Not as far as he knew. Not to mention that the Shodai looked more like his father than his mother. That aside, for now, he had a question to answer. Uzumaki Mito has always had a hand in my family, more so than someone who is merely fond of my mother, Kushina Uzumaki, as she so liked to proclaim. Menma began, she's always kept my mother close to her side despite my mother marrying into another clan. If I'm not mistaken, thinking back on it, Mito was the one that had encouraged the union between my parents. Originally I thought it was because of my father's obvious ties to the Hokage position and the likeliness of his becoming the Hokage at that point in time. Mito seemed to know that Minato was next in line for the hat. I thought perhaps she was trying to sway more power in her direction. Regardless, it resulted in a young marriage, and I was born quite soon after. But that's not right, is it? Mito hid herself away. Besides, that's hardly like her. Naruto mused, inwardly amused with Menma's attitude. He'd come to find Menma's obvious distaste of his younger self to be rather annoying. This side of Menma was somewhat refreshing. Although with his insight into Mito, he knew that she had probably been trying to ensure that he was born. Still, Menma's perspective would be an interesting one to consider. Yes, Menma agreed before continuing, Mito had stepped down and seemingly away from my family, but my mother was more and more involved in the clan. My father began training for the Hokage position, and as a result they were home less and less. I found out later that it was through Mito's insistence that my brother, Naruto, was even born. There was a short period of time where Mito had insisted my mother spend time with my father, staying at home rather than going to the clan. It was probably one of the happiest periods of time I remember having with my family. Naruto couldn't help the frown. When he'd imagined a family, life with his parents, he'd always imagined more bonding and affection. Looking back at his memories, even he had noticed the lack of that, a lack of presence when it came to his family members. Always out, always busy. Thinking back to his memories as his younger self, he hadn't even noticed Mito. She appeared to have kept her distance after his birth, not even being mentioned in the household. He certainly hadn't known she was still alive until Madara declared his attack. That in mind, he hadn't become suspicious due to the fact that his parents' busy routines had already been established and set by the time he old enough to remember anything at all. During that time, it was my happiest memories, yes, but they were also some of the more trying. Menma's expression became pained and Naruto felt his throat squeezing closed with the emotions he sensed emanating from Menma's chakra. You see, my brother was born mute. We don't know why, but Naruto didn't talk for almost 5 years. He could barely focus on any one thing for more than a moment. For a time we were certain he'd remain that way for the rest of his life. It broke my mother's heart. Naruto looked away sheepishly. Yeah, that's my fault. Menma's brow furrowed as he frowned before asking how? His expression had been distant, reminiscent. Now, his gaze sharpened as his focus snapped to the present, his attention peaked. Naruto looked to the roof of the tent as he scratched the back of his head. With a slight hum he turned his gaze back on Menma. As I hear it, my chakra and your brother's chakra are very similar. Almost exactly the same. Almost but never exact. Here, since he's your brother, our chakra should be very close as well. Naruto held out his hand, a Rasengan forming in the palm of his hand, which he offered to Menma. Menma hesitated for a moment, watching the rotating ball of chakra suspiciously. He gingerly held out his hand and Naruto dropped the ball into Menma's palm. The teen had been keen enough to coat his hand in chakra so that it did not rip through his arm. The ball stuttered a moment before shifting colors, becoming a lighter shade of blue but otherwise steadying. I couldn't do that with Madara. Naruto offered as Menma stared at the rotating ball. My father never taught me the jutsu, Menma whispered, said I should figure it out for myself. I mean rotation definitely, but on this level? I feel like an idiot having not realized it sooner. You know, my sensei who taught me this jutsu just gave me a water balloon and told me to figure it out on my own too. Naruto grinned, so yeah I guess figure it out works. I'm surprised you didn't though. I thought you were some kind of genius. Menma tilted his head, the Rasengan wisping out of existence. Firstly, just because someone is a genius, doesn't mean they're automatically good at everything. He shoved his hands close to his sides, almost like he wanted to put them on his hips. Secondly, didn't you create the jutsu? Naruto felt his cheeks warm while Madara barked out a laugh. Got you good, baka. No. I didn't, Naruto murmured, it was created by my father. Itachi coughed, reminding them that perhaps it was best to keep things to the topic at hand. So anyways, when I built Konoha, I used my chakra to do it and it would still be in the walls today. I imagine something like that would be distracting to the mind of a toddler. Naruto rubbed the back of his head, trying his best not to look guilty. I mean, what are the chances of having someone with the same chakra as you? Oh, what are the chances indeed. Madara hummed, a gleam in his eye as he smirked at Naruto. Naruto chose to ignore him as he gestured for Menma to continue. So yes, Naruto began to talk and then he was entered into the academy even though it didn't immediately appear as though the boy had any talent for it. It would seem Mito insisted on his admittance, however the odd thing was that they didn't put Naruto into the Uzumaki training program, when it was also clear that he leaned heavily toward the Uzumaki side of his heritage. It almost sounded like a deliberate sabotage. Truth be told, Naruto's academy attendance could have also been attributed to his enthusiasm for the profession. Naruto wanted to be a shinobi. It was all he talked about, it was all he attempted doing, it was all he ever asked. He tried to train, but I was kept busy with missions, and my parents, well, it was almost as though they forgot that they needed to train him. I mean, not really forgot, just sort of reluctant to do so. It is my opinion that they put him in the academy to appease his enthusiasm but not with any real intention of helping him become a shinobi. Well, it wouldn't do if he died on a random mission, now would it? Madara hummed. After all the trouble they went through to make sure he was born in order to use his chakra. How would they know? Itachi interrupted. How would they even have the slightest idea that Naruto would have the same chakra as the Shodai? Naruto looked to Madara, who shrugged. He wasn't going to even attempt an answer there. So Madara hadn't told his clan about the time travel. Good question, Naruto stated lamely, not meeting Itachi's gaze. The silence that greeted his response was loud, yet Naruto remained stubbornly quiet, refusing to say more. Itachi would know there was more, perhaps Menma as well, but they didn't ask anything more. How did you learn of all this? You would have been very young during all of this? Naruto asked suddenly, trying to redirect the focus of the conversation away from his chakra and his younger counterpart's chakra. Menma remained silent for a moment before sighing and rubbing the back of his head. I suppose I didn't see it as a problem at first. I didn't know any better. Then when Itachi started coming over more often and as I grew older, things started to make less sense. Between the two of us, we asked those who knew my parents before, people like Obito-san, who was one of my mother's students, Kakashi-san, who was my father's apprentice, and Haruto-san, who was my mother's sensei. They thought I just wanted stories about my parents before they were my parents, what they were like growing up in a sensei. After a while, things start falling into place. Some things I witnesses myself, some things I had to go digging for. Itachi and I have long debated the finer details. So, do you see Mito as the enemy? Is she the reason you are here? Madara asked, looking from Menma to Itachi. No. If anything, she seems to have gone out of her way to protect my family, to nurture it and mold it into some sort of vision only she, and maybe my mother, can see. What bothers me, so why I'm here, is that my brother seemed to have been the center of some sort of conspiracy, some giant ulterior motive. But you don't know what that is? No. There are too many puzzle pieces missing, Itachi answered. We only know that Madara seems to have the best interests of the village, including Naruto, well, had the best interest of Naruto, at heart. Completely uncalled for. Madara muttered under his breath. Naruto chose to ignore it. Going through the trouble of explaining things now would only complicate matters. Thank you, Menma-san, for answering my questions. Naruto stood, giving a short bow to the teen before he could also stand. We'll be taking our leave now. Madara stood as well, following Naruto out of the tent and moving towards his own tent. What do you want to do now? Wait. Either the 6 hours runs out or Mito comes to us. Whichever comes first. Naruto kept his gaze on the ground. And you're fine with that? With a war? Madara gripped Naruto's shoulder, stopping him from walking any further. You're the one that started this war. I'd have thought you would have done so with the intention to follow through. Naruto slapped Madara's hand away. At any rate, we'll need to draw out the third party, and this is the only way I can think of on how to do it. Madara watched him for a moment before stating, You're angry with me. Naruto turned a glare on the Uchiha. I'm angry with everyone. I'm here, when I shouldn't be, you're here, Mito is here. And all anyone cares about is some damn boxes. Even now, you won't open them? Madara was careful, his tone neutral. No. Naruto rubbed a hand over his face and took a deep breath, then another. We don't need them. We're both more than capable of stopping anyone standing on the other side of this war. Sadly. So why are you so fixated on those boxes? When I left the village, when I knew that Hashirama was hiding something, I didn't distance myself completely. As Hashirama died, I was there, too late to save him. He told me this, protect the boxes, protect the future you. He managed to imply that you, from this present, was in danger. Somehow he knew that someone would be targeting the boxes, but did he mean Mito or someone else? Why didn't you tell me this earlier, Baka? Naruto huffed. However, it posed an interesting thing to consider. Was Mito lying when she said she didn't have the other 4 boxes? Why did Mito ensure his rebirth into this world if she knew that someone would try to use him? I miss Tobirama. Naruto hung his head in defeat. He was much better at these kinds of things. Really? Madara deadpanned, I'm not good enough? Well, I don't know how long you've been around, but it's certainly been longer than me and you haven't figured anything out. Naruto threw his hands up in annoyance. Oh www. Do you mind? The loud shout interrupted their conversation and they turned towards a tent. Upon deciding that was indeed the tent the shout had come from, Madara let out a deep sigh. They approached cautiously while the tent's occupant continued to rant. Akira, Are you torturing Obito again? Madara questioned upon entering the tent. Naruto could only watch in amazement as a middle-aged Uchiha woman gave Madara a bland stare in response, and an Uchiha that looked to be the same age as Kakashi-sensei sprang away from a chair and hid behind Madara's back, gushing tears of relief. Oh, thank Kami, you've come to save me from this evil witch, Madara-sama. Oh please. Be rational, Obito-san. I was merely testing your intangibility endurance. I see it hasn't improved from the 3 minutes of last time. Akira shifted her posture as she placed a hand on her hip, her long hair swaying slightly as she did so. She reminded Naruto of the nobles he'd had meetings with so long ago. Tall, pale, with a calculating look of observation on her features. I like being able to see Akira. Obito's voice broke as he screeched at Akira, still hiding behind Madara. He has a point, Madara hummed, overusing his ability will deteriorate his vision irreparably. Obito would just hate to lose that which he's so proud of. Coddling him, and his ability doesn't allow him to improve and expand its possibilities. Akira countered, but there was a small smile of amusement at Madara's teasing. Coddling? You tried to set me on fire. Please stop shouting, Obito. Madara pinched the bridge of his nose, making Naruto think he'd dealt with this before. And I'm sure she asked first? Well, yay, she did. But I declined, so she did it anyway. Obito pouted. His reaction time has improved greatly. Akira provided, but his time limit is still at 3 minutes. What exactly is it that Obito-san can do? Naruto interrupted. His Mangekyo allows him to be intangible for small periods of time, and to transport to a new place almost instantly. Madara supplied. Naruto paused for a moment, the ability sounding familiar. He frowned as a hand lifted to scratch at his chin. Then the realization hit him like a punch in the gut. It's you? He pointed an accusatory finger at Obito, who froze, eyes shifting around as though looking for an exit. Naruto caught himself, feeling his face warm once again. I guess that's a pretty cool ability. Would you be up to demonstrating for a moment? Obito gave him an odd look, probably trying to decide if he was sane or not before nodding and moving towards the chair and then continuing to walk straight through it. When he turned back to face them, Naruto felt his heart jump to his throat as the gaze that met his was the same Mangekyo as Kakashi-sensei's had been. He didn't know how this man was connected to Kakashi, he didn't know how he was connected to the masked man from his past, but there was no point in dwelling on it. He clearly wasn't that man now. Have you ever tried transporting an object? Naruto asked, thinking of Kakashi's ability. This man had to have it. Yeah. It takes a long time though, and practicing the jutsu, as we said earlier, affects my vision. If I'm not careful, my eyes will lose all their light. It's what Itachi-san, Shisui-san and I have to face all the time. Obito's Mangekyo deactivated. So I try not to use it unless I have to, but Akira just wants to do experiments. Shisui-san is fast enough to dodge her, and Itachi-san is smart enough to avoid her, so that just leaves me and I'm neither fast enough or smart enough to get away in time. Well then, we'll be going. Madara moved to the door, seemingly deeming the situation under control. Obito, go join Shisui in guarding the boxes. As they left he gave Akira a nod, who nodded in turn, but no other words were exchanged. Obito gratefully scampered out of the tent, hurrying towards where Naruto sensed Shisui's chakra. It was rather abrupt, but Naruto sensed that Madara was a tad protective of the conversation's topic. Secrets about the Sharingan were being revealed, and although it was to Naruto, he still had an obligation to his clan to ensure those secrets remained exactly that, secret. So, Naruto began, thinking about the Uchiha around them, the ones he'd seen since arriving. Is the whole clan here? Yes. Felt it was safer for them. Better than leaving the elderly and the young behind. Madara replied. There was one family that chose not to come with though. An Uchiha with a Hyuga wife. They felt conflicted in joining the battle. Their children are in their teens. They chose to remain neutral as well. Madara answered, eyes distant as he thought over the little family of 4. Oh ho! Naruto grinned, rubbing his hands together. A family with both an Uchiha and a Hyuga. What happened with the Dujutsu? You're enjoying this too much. Madara frowned with a raised brow. They have both. One eye is as black as mine, and the other is as pure white as the moon. Heterochromia. However, the strength in each eye is different. The girl, Kokoro, leans towards the Sharingan, while the boy, Tashiru, has more strength in his Byakugan. And you, where do you consider them to be? Clan or not clan? Naruto asked, purely out of interest. They're whatever they want to be. Both clans carry prestige. As long as they behave in a manner befitting that prestige, I don't really care. Madara waved a hand. Enough of that. We've got about 4 hours left. Naruto lingered for a moment, watching as Madara walked away. Madara had indulged his curiosity, but he was right. It was time to get serious again. 0.0.0.0 Sakura poked her head through the tent flap, looking around quickly and quietly. To her surprise, she spotted her sensei already standing, motionless, by the side of an occupied bed. Karen-sama, her mentor, was seated at the desk, keeping her eyes on the paperwork in front of her in an effort to give Kakashi some privacy perhaps. Her eyes flickered towards Sakura before returning to the paperwork, pretending not to see her so she didn't have to chase her away. The medical tent was not meant to be visited unless there was an emergency. They were meant to be by their posts, and yet, here she was. She walked further into the tent, cautious and as quietly as she could. Perhaps she was being overly cautious, but the tent was close to the command tent after all. She stopped just behind her sensei, taking in the white sheet that covered her teammate. In hopeful hopelessness, her eyes traveled over the sheet, trying to see any sign of movement, a rise of his chest, a flutter of his hand, anything that would tell her that Naruto wasn't dead. She'd only been on his team for a month, but his absence affected her keenly. When the announcement came that Uchiha Madara wanted Naruto, wanted to kill him, she'd felt it as deeply as though it had been a stab wound. He had wormed his way into her bubble in a way that she never would have expected. She'd only really cared about Naruto for a month, but Kakashi-sensei had always loved Naruto like a little brother. She could only imagine how this was affecting him. As though summoned by the thought, Kakashi turned his attention to her, eyes red and sparkling. At the sight, Sakura's hand moved to her mouth, her own eyes feeling prickly as she tried to keep the emotions from spilling out. "Sensei," Sakura began, but she didn't know what to say. What could she say really? He just snapped Naruto's neck, like it was nothing. Kakashi's voice was raspy, tired, and I did nothing. I held people back, because of Sasuke. He stopped, took a deep shaky breath and looked towards the door. "Let's get back to our posts." Sakura tried to reach out for his hand, to stop him, to hug him, anything to tell him that he wasn't alone. But Kakashi was too quick, eager to bottle the pain away while she was left reeling with the emotions threatening to pull her under. She wasn't ready for this war. No one was. 0.0.0.0 It was nearly the 5-hour mark before anything new happened. "I sense people approaching," Naruto mentioned before slurping some more noodles. "Thank the ramen gods for cup noodles." Madara glanced at him and frowned. "It's still creepy." "Eh?" Naruto had dropped the henge while with Madara, appearing as his normal 16-year-old self. He'd have to henge again if anyone wanted to see Madara or if they left the tent. The orange armor wasn't a henge though. He'd taken it off, leaving him in plain black clothing. He'd never been comfortable lounging about in armor as though ready to spring into battle at a moment's notice. That was Madara and Hashirama's area of expertise. "I prefer the older you," Madara explained, not meeting Naruto's gaze as he read through a scroll. Naruto grinned, a small puff of smoke announcing the return of his henge. The slight change in height, the longer hair, the whisker marks, and the more aged appearance. Madara glanced at him and hummed in approval. "So who's coming?" "Surprisingly my father, mother, and Mito." Naruto paused to consider, and just behind them, Sarutobi, and Jiraiya. Madara stood and stretched, eyeing Naruto's noodles before snatching the half-eaten cup and walking towards the door. "Hey!" Naruto scrambled to join the Uchiha, pouting as he fell into step with the man who happily picked out all the best pieces that Naruto had been saving with his fingers as Naruto still held the chopsticks. He paused only long enough to consider his armor, wondering if he should really leave it behind. He was meeting with his parents. There shouldn't be a need for it just yet. Madara gave a soft order for the clan members to remain behind. He was confident that those from Konoha would uphold the 6-hour agreement. They still had a whole hour. Disappointingly, Mito had not come alone as Naruto had hoped. Perhaps this was an escort of sorts. However, if Naruto hadn't put on his armor before joining him, then the Uzumaki did not sense any hostility in their chakra. This meeting might be one last appeal for Madara to call off the war. Naruto and Madara used Sunshine to appear just in front of the approaching group. They'd been bored and the distraction was a welcome one. "Well?" Madara asked, slurping some noodles with chopsticks he'd stolen from Naruto. We've come to ask where the Shodai stands in this conflict. Unless, your stance has changed in the last 5 hours? Minato began, his gaze flickering between Madara and Naruto. Well, I do have what I asked for, don't I? Madara mused, glancing towards a pouting Naruto. But see, he won't open the boxes. Something about not until he is all 9. Madara gave a big sigh, eyes showing a what can you do about it expression. Naruto was speechless. He'd said no such thing. This guy? 9? Kushina asked, brows furrowing together as she turned towards Mito. We're only aware of 8 sealing wonders. Never mind that. You never said anything about opening the boxes, only that you wanted Uzumaki Naruto. Minato's gaze narrowed as his posture stiffened. Naruto felt his father's irritation, his indignation. Are you worried? Madara chuckled, his eyes taunting Minato. Don't think you can survive? Madara. Naruto growled, sending the Uchiha a look, fist tightening as tension grew. Naruto felt Madara's chakra recede at his irritation. He was going to listen and tone it down. Look, I want the boxes, just so I can hide them again. They really are not something to mess around with. I hid them for a reason, and the fact that 2 people I thought I could trust seemed to be so fixated on destroying what I worked a whole 4 years on, well, let me just leave it there. Naruto's killer instinct rose in response to his words, sharp and biting. For Naruto to have worked on something for that amount of time, as a person who'd mastered the Kage Bunshin training method, it meant that essentially, one could equate it to a lifetime of work. They were messing with something very precious to him. Well then, take the boxes, hide them. I don't care, Minato stated, with a coldness Naruto was shocked to see coming from his own father. For a moment he stared at the man, taking in the neutral features, the tightness in his shoulders, and the absolute determination in his eyes. Hang on, Minato-kun. Sarutobi chose that moment to interrupt, stepping closer. Let us not forget that we are all Konoha shinobi here. Surely, Naruto-sama, you see the value in letting Konoha utilize the power the boxes contain for the sake of maintaining Konoha's position amongst the shinobi villages. Naruto cocked his head in consideration, but Madara knew by the smirk on his face that it was only a mockery of interest. Is Konoha's position threatened? Is there a village outside of the Land of Fire that can stand as our equal? Not alone, Mito answered, but together perhaps. If they work together then maybe. And even then, maybe. Madara snorted, throwing a hand to the side as though the very idea of being bested was preposterous. Don't be so arrogant as to assume we are untouchable. Sarutobi narrowed his gaze and the pitch of his voice lowered. Always remember, even a Jonin can kill a Jonin. Madara grinned, stepping towards the older shinobi. Come now Hiru-chan, surely you don't presume to compare Konoha to a mere Jonin. His tone was deathly quiet, a hint of amusement giving it just enough of an edge that it made the Sarutobi elder want to shudder. Naruto's gaze was on Mito and his mother. They were quiet, Mito considering. Was this the tipping point? His mother seemed reserved, her earlier pain and anger still lingering yet strangely calm. It was the type of calm one expected from an obedient soldier, leaving all the difficult decisions to their commanding officer. Would Mito make the right decision? Yet, the entire purpose of this war, the boxes, had yet to make an appearance, making him wonder once again if Mito was lying or telling the truth. She was so hard to get an accurate read on. Was it the Edo Tensei, or years of practice? So you won't give up this war without the boxes? Minato interrupted, intent on keeping the conversation on topic. He stepped closer to Naruto, causing Naruto to move his gaze away from his mother and Mito. And you won't use them for Konoha's benefit? Minato's jaw twitched with his anger. And you won't stand on the side of the village, only with Madara? Madara huffed and crossed his arms over his chest, turning his gaze away in irritation, Sharingan spinning wildly. Something about Minato really irked him. Naruto could see that, and he couldn't exactly say he blamed the Uchiha. He returned his gaze to Minato's. I want the boxes so much that I'm not willing to back down, and if that means a war, then that means a war. Someone standing here knows where they are and nothing less than their complete surrender will change my mind. Naruto accepted the challenge, and kept his gaze fixed squarely on the steely blue eyes of the fifths. There was a tense moment of silence as each Hokage glared at the other, measuring the other's determination. Suddenly Minato whipped around, cloak snapping with the force of the motion. So be it. If you will not stand with Konoha, then you are an enemy of Konoha and will be treated as one. Mito, please. Naruto turned to the red-haired Uzumaki, his gaze softening. He felt lost, he felt angry. He needed answers. He needed to end this war before it began. Mostly, he was getting frustrated. Why wasn't the third party showing themselves? She turned away, Kushina already walking to join Minato. You won't win this war. Naruto called after their retreating forms. Only Hiruzen turned to answer his almost desperate statement. Are you really so sure of yourself, Hokage-sama? Naruto looked down, his heart swelling with the pain of his certainty. Yes, I am. I think, Naruto, it's time to get serious. We've given them all the time they'd possibly need to fix this. Madara placed a hand on his should, a hand Naruto shrugged off. Madara tisked impatiently. There's no point in throwing a tantrum just because things aren't going your way. Grow up. I'm going to stay here for the remaining hour, collect Senjutsu or something. Naruto replied, crouching down to touch a hand to the ground. The pillar of earth that sprang from the grassy plain at his silent insistence was 2 feet off the ground. He promptly sat on it before calming his mind and stilling his body. Maybe, stretching out his senses would be useful. Madara stood watching him for 10 full minutes before turning and heading back to the Uchiha compound. 0.0.0.0 Mito moved closer to Haruto, a scroll in hand and a frown on her face. Kushina glanced towards them but otherwise remained close to Minato. It was almost time for the fighting to begin and for the most part the atmosphere was somber, tense, and quiet. You are to deliver this to the Shodai. Mito handed the scroll over to Haruto, who did his best to hide the flinch at the mention of his father. As he rose his hand to take the scroll, Mito leaned in closer to whisper, "Don't let anyone stop you or take this scroll. It's of the utmost importance." Haruto nodded before grasping the scroll tightly and immediately walking towards the door. He knew she meant that someone might try to stop him. They'd be sorely pressed to do so. Uzumaki Haruto was not a shinobi to take lightly. Mito moved back to her place at the war council table. The members of the room were taking the last hour to go over the battle plans. She knew that their plans were pointless. She's lived to see Madara and Naruto in action. And yet, there was something that told her, their victory wasn't as sure as they liked to believe it was. 0.0.0.0 Omake. Guess what? Naruto yelled upon entering the room. The blonde was dressed in a bright light-up Christmas sweater, with an overly large Christmas hat on his head and a large bag in his hand. I really couldn't say. Madara deadpanned from his seat on the couch. It's the holiday season. Tatsumaki screamed just as loudly as Naruto had, appearing next to Naruto in what appeared to be an elf costume, with his own, somewhat smaller bag. This gift is for you, and this one for you, and for you, and you, Naruto sang as he walked around the room handing the right gifts to the right person. Tatsumaki skipped along behind him handing each person a bright red hat to match Naruto's. Kushina held up the obviously wrapped frying pan with a half-smile half-grimace. Minato could only guess by the quickly forming stain that he'd received ink of some sort. Sasuke stared at the tiny pot plant in amazement, amazed that Naruto expected him to keep the thing alive. Sakura hugged the clearly handmade Menma plushie while also shuffling to the door before said Namikaze noticed it. Naruto's sewing skills were rather interesting. Kakashi happily opened his present, pleased with the bright orange book that he'd been forbidden to buy by Minato, tucking it into his pocket before the fifth noticed and took it away. He even took a hat from Tatsumaki and put it on. Menma took the unwrapped flak jacket as an apology for cutting holes in all his previous ones. He did not care to take the hat Tatsumaki offered with a grin. Mito coughed into her hand to hide the horrified frown upon receiving an uglier sweater than the one Naruto was wearing. Arashi was less than pleased with the same leaking gift that Minato had received. Itachi politely thanked Naruto for his own plant, promising to ensure that it thrived. Naruto muttered something about Uchiha needing something to love less intensely than their family members. Arushi received a target practice board with a set of pink paint bombs. Instead of a hat, Tatsumaki discreetly offered her the recipe to make more paint bombs. Lastly, Madara received a very large box of homemade cookies, as well as a plant. A Venus flytrap to be precise. Naruto stared at him with a wide grin, holding out a hand expectantly. Come on Madara, you know better. It's tradition. Don't tell me you forgot again? No, I didn't forget. Madara seemed to be growing more and more uncomfortable by the minute. Here. He stuck a hand into his pouch and pulled out one of his newly acquired and sharpened kunai. He dropped it into Naruto's hand, who pouted. You totally forgot. His grin returned full force in the blink of an eye. That's okay. I got us matching sweaters, he yelled, grabbing Madara's collar before the poor man could make a dash for the door. Alright guys, that's it for the video. If you enjoyed it, please feel free to leave a like and subscribe. As always, the rest of the story is already out over on Patreon, link to that will be in the description. Anyways, until next time, peace.